All rights reserved. We reserve all rights. Many globe proponents either purposely, falsely, or ignorantly claim Alex Gleason's map is a globe projection unwrapped into a two-dimensional circle with the fantasy island Antarctica continent shorelines wrapped around it. Let's put that fallacy to rest right now. Alex Gleason was a vehement flat earther, and in his own words, his map was not a globe projection. It's a geocentric flat plane featuring a small and local sun. This is the 1893 book he wrote, Is the Bible from Heaven? Is the Earth a Globe? Completely destroying the heliocentric model using real science, which we'll get into in detail. Gleason made our 24-hour sun work perfectly on his map, along with the solstices and tropics. He states very clearly that the sun moves over our Earth, winding in and out of the tropics, creating the solstices and seasons. He literally drew them in the bottom left corner and bottom right corner of his map, and wrote about them extensively from pages 317 to 329 in his book. How can this be a globe projection for the heliocentric model when it's depicting a geocentric sun not once, but twice? You can't even make it make sense. Facts are facts, and the facts say this is a map of a geocentric plane made by a flat earther. Read it for yourself. Ironically, these same people who have not even read Gleason's books and claim his map is their globe projection stretched out in one breath, in the other breath say the flat earth Gleason's map is dead after the final experiment and alleged 24-hour sun. So they contradict themselves and surrender all evidence of any logical thinking ability, admitting they killed their own globe model. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Firstly, I appreciate and welcome the critique and challenges that I asked for in parts 1 and 2, with people claiming base altitudes, mountain ranges between, azimuths, time zones, etc. may account for the impossible sun times I exposed and questioned. And yes, I openly admit I had not researched that possibility at the time, and now I have. So I will show you in detail later in this film that those only strengthen my case, not weaken it. So thank you. I have nothing to hide, only to reveal. Also, a quick shout out and apology to Level Earth Observer for unwittingly using his VapeGate thumbnail graphic in part 1 to make fun of VapeGaters, when in fact his actual video behind the thumbnail was actually challenging them as well. I'm sorry, and go sub to his channel, it's excellent. The globe model claims the Earth has a circumference of 24,901 miles around the equator, a diameter across either side of 7,917 miles, and a radius from center to edge between 3,963 miles across the equator to 3,950 miles equator to pole, due to their alleged oblate spheroid, which we're told the Earth allegedly deviates from a perfect sphere by only 1/3 of 1%, which supports a spherical model in most contexts, and so it will do for debunking it. When we pull up the State Engineering and Surveyor profile map of the canals and locks of the state of New York and look at the Erie Canal running from Lake Erie to the Hudson River, we can see the surveyor's elevation of the water's surface and length of each level, or distance in miles between each lock on the Erie Canal, as well as the altitude of each level above the tide water at Albany. We're interested in two places here. Lockport Lock is at mile 321, there, and Rochester Lock is at mile 259, there. 321 minus 259 makes that stretch 62 miles long. But Lockport's elevation above tidewater at Albany is 512 feet there, and Rochester's is only 509 feet there, showing the water down that whole 62-mile stretch only descends 3 feet from Lockport to Rochester. If the Earth were a globe 24,901 miles in circumference and proper allowance made for curvature, there would be a divergency from either end to end of each other of 2,562 feet 8 inches, or rather the apex of the arc of that 62 miles would have to be 1/4 of that divergency, meaning 640 feet of fall in both directions from the 31-mile midpoint between them to either side, 640 feet that way and 640 feet that way. Or rather, if we lived on a globe, they would have had to have dug down 640 feet deep at the 31-mile middle point of these two locks and then dig level from each end to meet it in the middle in order to make this canal nearly level. But they didn't do that, and yet there are only 3 feet difference in elevation, as I'll show you why. The next longest level on the Erie Canal is between Syracuse and York Mills. Syracuse is at mile 166 there, and York Mills at mile 113 there. 166 minus 113 is 53 miles between them, and yet the surveyor's theodolite and transit level have both ends at just under 427 feet above tidewater at Albany. So there isn't even a 3-foot drop here, just flat as a pancake with 0 locks or gates for 53 miles. There should be a divergency of over 52 miles of 1,802 feet 8 inches, or rather, again, an intervening convex apex of that arc, again, always 1/4 the divergency, sloping at 450 feet 8 inches between them if the Earth were a sphere and 24,901 miles in circumference. But nope, nothing. Flat as a pancake. Here too, they did not have to dig down 450 feet at the 26-mile center point between the two locks and then dig level from each end to the middle. Our flat level Earth already did it for them long before their engineers ever came along. And since these two canals cannot exist on this globe, but yet there they are, provably flat as a pancake on the ground where we live, not in the sky where we don't live, we can't be on a globe, whether you saw a light in the sky in Antarctica or not, and therefore Fantasy Island cannot exist as claimed. Period. In fact, a datum horizontal line is used in surveying and engineering for measuring distances accurately. Like here, where you have a ground changing in different elevations, it gives you a medium reference to make sure your lighthouse doesn't look like the Leaning Tower of Pisa and fall into the water. In the British House of Commons standing orders, i.e. the law, Order number 55 states that when building anything, plans have to show the surface of the ground marked on it, the intended level, and a datum horizontal line. That datum line shall be the same throughout the whole length of the work. And in the case of long projects like a waterway, cut, public carriage, road, a railway, a tram road, it has to be near one of the termini, the beginning or the end. In other words, it's against the law to assume a curved Earth over long-distance engineering projects. So in order to have their cake and eat it too, as is the case in 100-mile-long waterways like the Suez Canal, they have come up with the theory of equipotential water and gravity to defy logic, observation, and physics. The Suez Canal is around 100 miles long of dead level surface water from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and no locks or allowance was made for Earth's curvature in its construction. It's simply a flat continuation from sea to shining sea. Geometry alert! Don't tune out, we'll explain this simply together. Let's say the blue arc from the Red Sea, A, to the Mediterranean Sea, E, represents the 100-mile Suez Canal on a globe, and this is not in scale. 100 miles is obviously not 1/8 of the alleged 24,900 miles of circumference on the globe model. But if this were in scale, based on the alleged Earth's circumference, the standard 8 inches per mile squared curve calculation over 100 miles used by navigators, surveyors, map makers, engineers, etc., which, yes, only works for 1/4 of a circumference, as it calculates drop and divergence away from you, not convergence back towards you on a circle. But since that 1/4 of 24,900 miles would be 6,225 miles that this formula does work for, and we're only talking about the measly 100-mile Suez Canal, that would put the total length of an alleged curve of the Suez Canal as having gone down from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea 6,666 feet 8 inches over 100 miles, or, if you prefer to flip it this way, the Red Sea has gone down 6,666 feet 8 inches from the Mediterranean Sea. But really it hasn't, because geometrically, straight down is the shortest distance between 2 points, a straight line, which would actually be the green intersecting line between them, A, the Red Sea, and E, the Mediterranean Sea. Other than a yo-yo, playing card, boomerang, or paper airplane, affected by another external so-called force like aerodynamics, if you drop something, it doesn't go out away from you towards the kitchen wall for the first half of its fall and then come back in towards your feet for the second half of the fall. It drops in a straight line from your hand, point A, to your feet, point E. So you could say on a globe, A, the Red Sea doesn't actually drop 6,666 feet 8 inches to E, the Mediterranean Sea. It first goes up from A to the 50-mile yellow point B in the middle of the Suez Canal, and then drops again to point E, or vice versa, since if you take the straight green horizontal datum line and green point B between points A and E, it is obvious yellow B is higher than green B on the straight path between A and E, or E and A. So both of those green and yellow B's are on what's called the chord, or convexity, of the entire 100-mile distance of alleged arc between the Red Sea point A and Mediterranean Sea point E, done by taking the green horizontal datum line between them and drawing intersecting identical angled and equidistant lines from the dead center of your circle or alleged globe's latitude and longitude 0 point, shown as red point Z down there at the equator. As we go up what's called the vertical from the equator red Z to our start point of the Suez Canal A, we see that the yellow line from A to F on the vertical is perpendicular to the end of the Suez Canal measuring point E, and we notice the distance between yellow B on the alleged curve and green B on the horizontal datum line between them, drawn in orange, is roughly 1/4 the distance from A to F. And since we know the total feet of curve over the 100-mile alleged blue arc from the Red Sea A to Mediterranean Sea E at 8 inches per mile squared is 6,666 feet 8 inches, then 1/4 of that gives us 1,666.5 feet of convexity at the 50-mile Suez Canal center yellow point B, from either B to the Red Sea A or B to the Mediterranean Sea E. So to make the Suez Canal perfectly level for 100 miles on a globe, you would have to dig down its 50-mile midway point at yellow B to green B 1,666.5 feet. And then you'd be digging down 416 feet at points D and H, 1/4 of that arc between A and B or B and E. But they didn't. Not a single lock for 100 miles because apparently globes and water on them only curve on basic paper geometry, not in reality. Ironically true because there is no curve or globe in reality. So they say, oh, well, the surface of the water is equipotential. It has roughly the same distance to the Earth's center of gravity, so it's not necessary to dig 1,666 feet in the middle of the Suez Canal or adjust for points D or H or anything in between. But gravity is just a theory by Newton, reworked into another theory by Einstein, neither of them a fact. Yet standing at point B on top of a round hill and clearly seeing your friend waving up to you from point A down below you is reality, not theory. And I'm sorry, if this were a hill and you were standing over here at A and your friend was standing over here at E and you wanted to walk straight to each other level without your legs burning from having to climb up this hill to point B or stop yourself running down the other side, you have to dig a tunnel straight through line C. Yet the horizontal datum line of the Suez Canal is only 26 feet below the Mediterranean and is continued level from one sea to the other, and the surface water runs level and parallel with this datum line. Even a 3-year-old child could tell you that blue curved line is not the same as that green straight line. Facts are facts, Jack. Jack and Jill ran straight through a hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down as his face smashed the mound, and Jill was a flat earther after. No, Steve, water is theoretically equipotential based on theoretical gravity. Theory always trumps fact. But even if you allow them their ridiculous equipotential water theory, railways, mountain tunnels, and undersea cables are not. The London and Northwestern Railway from London to Liverpool through Birmingham is 180 miles long. C to D is the horizontal datum line from the level of the River Thames in London at D to the level of the Mersey River in Liverpool, which all their elevations were measured to build the railway. This half-cut cross shows Liverpool Mersey River there on the left and all of the surveying elevations and hills going across to the railway midpoint at Birmingham all the way on the right compared to their horizontal datum line below. H is the middle station at Birmingham with an elevation of 240 feet above their horizontal datum line below, meaning they measured it and at 240 feet above the level of the River Thames, just like with the Suez Canal, but this is a railroad track, not magical gravity water. If the Earth were a globe, then as we see here, the datum line over 180 miles would have to be the chord of the arc, blue D to D to D. So the summit of the arc at Birmingham would have to be 5,400 feet above the horizontal datum line, denoting the Trinity high water mark at London Bridge over the Thames. But nope, the engineers measure it at 240 feet. Impossible on a globe, yet there it is in reality, not a trick of the eyes or perspective, not magic gravity water, just cold hard steel, ground, and fact. Then in 1869, the UK Admiralty Navy surveyed the ocean bottom from Valencia on the western coast of Ireland, the yellow B on the right, to Trinity Bay in Newfoundland, the light blue A on the left, and laid a transatlantic cable with a steamship. C to D is the green datum horizontal line. Their survey and steamship charts showed the distance to be 1,665 nautical miles or 1,942 standard miles. To figure out how much cable they needed, the greatest depth found was here in blue at 2,422 fathoms times 6 gives you 14,554 feet deep. The next deepest section was the red line at 14,400 feet deep, while in the middle, in the orange, it's only 9,600 feet deep. But if the Earth is a 25,000-mile spherical globe and the Atlantic Ocean is convex with equipotential magic gravity water as they claim, then the green horizontal datum line would be a chord to the great arc of water above it in blue. The center would stand at 628,560 feet, or nearly 120 miles higher than the coasts of the two stations at Trinity Bay and Valencia. And the greatest depth would be the center of the ocean between the two, in orange, where it would be 106,310 fathoms, or 637,860 feet deep. But nope. It was measured at only 9,600 feet deep in reality. It should also be bloody obvious that the distance of that blue line around the basketball, call that the alleged globe water surface, is longer than the green line around the much smaller volleyball, call that the alleged globe ocean floor. So even withstanding the elevation changes on the ocean floor below, it's obvious the distance across the ocean floor would be much shorter than the distance over the surface. But in the published report, the opposite happened. The steamer ship that laid the cable went 1,665 miles, yet laid 1,852 miles of cable. Impossible on a globe. Not a trick of the eyes, a light in the sky, or magic gravity water. Just cold steel ocean floor cable and fact. We could sit here all day and show example after example of this, but there's no need, since none of this can exist on a globe, yet there they all are in reality. We cannot live on a globe. And since Fantasy Island can only exist on the globe, then again, whether you saw a 24-hour light in the sky in one place in Antarctica or not, we don't live on the sky, so that's the end of that nonsense. Not so fast, the globies say. We've known the Earth as a globe since at least 1482, since we still have Martin Erdapfel's actual globe, shown for real here, 62 years before the 1540 formation of the Jesuits you claim invented this model. A great point, and I noticed that Africa, Southern Europe, and a small bit of the Middle East to Western India take up half of the entire Earth on his globe. So I wondered how the other 3/4 of the known Earth fit on the backside of this globe. So I found an antique map dealer who has the entire thing. There's the front side we saw. The back side of the globe is East India into Southeast Asia and Indonesia up to Tartaria, but that's none of my business, with Southeast Asia mapped out almost as large as Africa. So the red is one half the globe, the yellow is the other half of the globe, and even though Southeast Asia in yellow is just east of Africa in red, apparently if you sail due west from Africa, you come right back to Southeast Asia across the ocean. So everything in red just doesn't exist. But some guy in 1482 fit everything in blue and green on a basketball in a metal stand, and that's how they knew we live on a globe? How, pray tell, did they map out this globe and miss 3/4 of everything on it? Because, Steve, you idiot, they didn't discover the West until Columbus in 1498, when he sailed for the West Indies. 16 years after this globe proved there was no West Indies. Then why did he bother sailing west just to get back to Indonesia? So you need to shut up and stop claiming the ancients thought we lived on a globe, as the oldest globe we have is as recent as 1482 and was not even 1/3 of the known Earth all the way around it. You can't map an alleged globe you've never even been around to clearly see it's wrong and impossible. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Antarctica, the coldest, most savage place on Earth. So remote, its very existence was questioned by navigators for centuries. Even after it was discovered in 1820, it remained for decades terra incognita, a land unknown.
Really? A land unknown until its discovery in 1820? That's interesting because even on this fake 1482 globe, right under the Tropic of Capricorn, it says clearly Circulus Antarcticus, the Antarctic Circle. A strange name for a latitude boundary to a place that doesn't allegedly get discovered until 340 years later, showing precisely where its outer latitude ring is. Of course, there is no fantasy ice continent drawn there, but they knew the circle. In fact, it's also clearly mapped out just like Gleason's ice wall on the 1766 Delisle flat Earth map as Terra Antarcticus, not Terra Incognito, 54 years before the alleged 1820 discovery of Antarctica. I wonder if we're being lied to about history. To recap parts 1 and 2, in order to propagate the Jesuit heliocentric cosmology and globe model, it has to have a period of constant 24-hour sun months in late October through early February down on Fantasy Island, aka Antarctica, just as it provably does in the northern Arctic Circle, where people actually live and witness this reality provably in the summer months of May through August, because the alleged south tip of the globe has to point at the sun on the same 23-degree tilt angle for its summer months as the alleged north tip of the globe does on its summer months. On the globe model, what happens in latitude rings stays in latitude rings, even its opposite alleged northern and southern latitude ring counterparts. So let's set the groundwork for how this globe fraud and scam work in modern days via the digital Santa Claus fiction known as satellite GPS or global positioning system. Though not a globe projection, Gleason's map is still a partial projection map, as it says clearly on top, with instructions on the back that modern copies do not have, so very few flat earthers have seen it. So when it says scientifically and practically correct as it is, it means as a longitude and time calculator, as it says clearly on the top left. It does not mean that the Earth geometrically looks exactly like this in this shape and proportion from an overhead view. Our east-west longitude system could not be developed using heavenly luminaries for east or west navigation without clocks, since they are constantly moving east to west, so you can't head in the direction of a moving object. So it was developed for navigation based on fictional fixed clock times and time zones based on a 2D rectangular grid projection of the fictional spherical globe model. At least you can find north with a compass or North Star Polaris by night, which never moves. But try finding your way north without a compass by Polaris. If it was flying over your head from north to south behind you as you tried to follow it north, you wouldn't know which way to go. Both circles and spheres have curved lines that do not intersect all latitude and longitude lines at perfect 90-degree square angles. But since the latitude and longitude system is set up that way, both models have to distort their proportions with projections to accommodate that fiction. The globe does it this way, Gleason had to do it this way. in order to fit the world's already existing almanac latitude-longitude coordinates for all places onto this circle, instead of inventing an entirely new system and coordinates that nobody is using. Both the Globe and Gleason are using 69 regular miles per degree of latitude from the North Pole to either South Pole or outer ice wall on Gleason's map. So compared to almanac latitude grids, Gleason's continents are drawn in correct proportion lengthwise from inside to out. But longitudinally, the globe model's longitude lines converge closer together in distance as they head from the equator towards the theoretical South Pole and Fantasy Island, so their southern continents are always drawn skinny and pointy to accommodate this. Gleason's longitude lines have to diverge the entire way out from the North Pole to accommodate the existing fictional latitude-longitude grid, so a degree of longitude at the Tropic of Cancer is roughly 51 miles across, while that same degree at the equator is now 69 miles across, then 87 miles across at the Tropic of Capricorn, and roughly 138.5 miles at the outer ice wall. So his continents have to be drawn or projected fatter and wider as you go further out or south to fit the fictional grid. So they are not in proportion to their latitude. Like the globe, the truth of what the Earth actually looks like from overhead is probably somewhere in the middle of both models. That is why you can calculate a longitude distance this way if you have the formula, or even a latitude distance in yellow this way at 69 miles per degree, but you can't just measure this way, the purple line, because the latitude difference remains constant while the longitude difference is changing proportionately, without using advanced trigonometry calculations using comparative distance ratios to a fixed point like the North Pole. But whereas on the diverging Gleason map, one longitude degree on the Tropic of Capricorn is 87 miles wide, on the converging globe it has to be only 63 miles wide, which does not match actual reality. And that is where the digital magic of GPS and Google Earth comes into play. Those of us dinosaurs old enough remember David Copperfield using magic to make the Statue of Liberty disappear in real time on live TV. It seemed impossible. What we didn't know was that the entire audience floor and stage with fixed cameras was slowly rotating away from the statue while the curtain was up. So when the curtain was pulled down, the frame around the curtain was no longer facing the Statue of Liberty. That same sleight of hand magic today is now called GPS and Google Earth. And here's how they do it. Remember, you don't need to manipulate the north or inside. It already mirrors the globe fantasy with converging longitude lines into the north center. It's the south you have to manipulate. Back both long before and in the 1880s and 90s, latitude circles to determine north-south position of the equator were found using a combination of solar declination tables showing the sun's visual angle at noon above the horizon at various dates on the ecliptic as it goes between the tropics of Cancer to the equator to Capricorn and back, along with Mariner's astrolabes as shown on the left, backstaffs like the Davis quadrant on the right, octants on the left, and sextants on the right, in use up until modern GPS and Google Earth. However, longitude to determine east-west position was much more difficult, if not impossible, as seen here on this 1683 nautical chart by Montier, as it cannot be determined by astronomical observations in the sky like latitude can. It required centuries of study and invention to invent a fictional prime meridian line and then a way to coordinate clocks at different distant places using instruments like the chronometer, then the telegraph, and later radio to synchronize clocks. but more importantly, centuries of astronomical societies, nautical societies, and guilds sharing and compiling these observations and information were put into massive nautical almanacs like these two, the American Ephemeris and Nautical Almanacs of 1889 and 1891 by the United States Naval Observatory. Over 850 pages that helped sailing vessels for centuries get to where they wanted to go at any time of the year, with most of the painstaking work already calculated for them. In 1889, all of these almanacs agreed that Hammerfest, Norway was located at 70 degrees 45 minutes north latitude, and sailors and trade ships were getting to and fro there just fine using these almanacs. But it was also known that in Hammerfest, Norway, there is a continual 24-hour sun in their summer, from May 11th to July 22nd, 2 months and 10 days. Today, that can still be seen, though once again, the almighty accurate globe software can't agree within 2 days if it starts May 12th or May 14th, or if it finishes July 30th or 31st. But either way, there is a 24-hour sun. Which means if we live on a globe, there has to be 2 months and 10 days or close of 24-hour sun at 70 degrees 45 minutes south latitude in their summer months of November, December, and January. If there isn't, then we don't live on a globe, and icy fantasy island cannot exist. So Gleason wrote to Professor J. Morrison of the Nautical Almanac Office, Bureau of Navigation, Navy Department in Washington, D.C., the guy in charge of these almanacs, to check if that 24-hour sun was happening at 70 degrees 45 minutes south latitude as well. Morrison replied, on December 21st and 22nd, there's summer solstice down there, at South Shetland, about 70 degrees south latitude, see any good map of the world. The sun rises 2 hours, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. The sun sets 9 hours, 56 minutes, 30 seconds. A total of 19 hours and 53 minutes as the longest continued day. That's 4 hours and 7 minutes of no sun, where its northern latitude twin counterpart Hammerfest, Norway, is having 24-hour sun on their June 21st summer solstice. Morrison continues, reverse the results for June 22nd at South Shetland's winter solstice, and we shall have for June 21st and 22nd, sun rises 9 hours, 56 minutes, 30 seconds, sun sets 2 hours, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, total 7 hours and 53 minutes as the shortest continued day. That's 7 hours and 53 minutes of visible sun in the sky that it shouldn't be having, since its northern twin latitude Hammerfest on their December 21st solstice is in the middle of several months of 24 hours of no sun in the sky at all, with the sun never climbing above 4 degrees below their horizon at their solar noon on their December 21st winter solstice. Morrison finishes by stating the above results are for the sun's upper limb, meaning the very top part of the sun that is first and last to be seen coming up over and setting over the horizon, or for the very first and last rays or sunlight, and are absolutely correct. These were obviously globe killers that nobody wanted to address, because if you were getting 4 hours and 7 minutes of no sun in the sky at 70 degrees south latitude in the dead of their summer solstice, there is no way in hell on a globe that all of these coastal bases even further north at 68 and 69 degrees south latitude could be claiming to have 2+ months of 24-hour sun, as was covered in parts 1 and 2. The globe model demands everything inside of that ring would be getting more and more days of alleged 24-hour sun. So if that ring has 4 hours of no sun at 70 degrees, none of those bases along the coast outside of that ring could possibly be having months of 24-hour sun. So it was GPS and later its digital fictional counterpart Google Earth to the rescue. Now, instead of the South Shetlands being at 70 degrees south latitude, as the good Professor Morrison assured us any good almanac or map of the world would confirm and are absolutely correct, Google Earth and GPS now claim the South Shetlands are actually at 62.5 degrees south latitude, not 70. Remember, 1 degree of latitude is 69 miles. So we are to believe the incredibly detailed almanacs at the time were mistaken by 517 miles? How were all of those British, Spanish, and Chilean mariners and Scandinavian sealers getting there and back accurately from 1819 to 1993 if their sea charts were off by 517 miles from modern GPS? Admittedly, the Glober's favorite exercise is mental gymnastics to make sense of nonsense, so they will say that modern satellite globe mapping from high above in space has made modern longitude and latitude calculation much more accurate than centuries of combined sailing observations and calculations from the ground. In other words, for Morrison to say the world's maps and almanacs said the South Shetlands were at 70 degrees south latitude, 517 miles south of where GPS and Google Earth now claim they are today. In other words, they thought it was down here in the green instead of up here in red. Nearly 3 extra days of sailing each way and not noticing the giant Antarctic peninsula on or in the way. That's like saying that those almanacs were so inaccurate that they mistakenly thought San Francisco back in 1889 was 517 miles south actually, where San Diego is today. Yet somehow by accident, the steamer and clipper ships had been getting to San Francisco perfectly without error since at least the 1840s, not missing it by 517 miles south. Also, modern GPS and Google Earth still have Hammerfest, Norway at 70 degrees 32 minutes north latitude, almost exactly where the almanacs in 1889 had it, at 70 degrees 45 minutes north latitude. So why isn't that now off by 517 miles as well? Once again, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. We're to believe there are GPS satellites up in anywhere from alleged low Earth orbit 2,000 kilometers away taking detailed pictures of the Shetland Islands while traveling at 17,224 miles per hour to 15,435 miles per hour, which no camera shutter speed in history can do without a giant streaky blur, up until the very recent Sony A9 III, Samsung S23 Ultra, and now the 2024 INRS Scarf, and not even far away enough to get in scale the Earth around it to itself. Or they claim they're in medium Earth orbit at 20,400 kilometers away, where you can allegedly at least see the Earth's alleged 12,756 kilometer diameter, but in which case you can't even see the Shetland Islands, let alone film and plot them with a camera moving at 22,370 miles per hour, or even zoom in on them to get detail to the closest meter. But that's okay because they have geostationary satellites way out at 35,786 kilometers that can see the whole Earth and the Shetland Islands. Well, not really, but at least they aren't moving. Well, they are. They are moving at 6,935 miles per hour. So there not only isn't a shutter speed in the world that can film something at 7,000 miles per hour, but there isn't a zoom in the world that could get in that close and accurate to the meter, even if standing dead still. Don't forget, the Earth is also allegedly spinning at 1,000 miles per hour as well. If only there were just some tiny shred of evidence that space satellites are really just cameras attached to solar panels and balloons flying around in regular low atmosphere. But that's none of my business. Anyway, as we'll prove later, this is just used to hide, distort, and disguise the actual expanding longitude distances on the Gleason flat Earth map as you go south or farther out from the center north point of the flat Earth. And while it is true that the equator runs south of the tip of India, as shown here on the Gleason map of our true Earth, as it even does on this ridiculous 2006 NASA copyrighted image, if the North Pole was really there on a globe, then the South Pole would be down there, and the equator, meaning the equidistant latitude point between these two, would be there in red, where the Tropic of Cancer is shown, not way down there in green. That is clearly not the equidistant diameter point between the top and bottom of this fake CGI globe circle, which they distort in every image to make their reality appear to fit on their impossible fiction. They need to hide all of that massive ice wall, all of that endless ocean, and all of that land outside of the equator or south by squeezing it into an area this big, which is impossible. This is why every fake composite NASA releases of the Earth, you see impossible things, like the United States taking up half the side of the Earth and bigger than South America or even Africa on other NASA fakes. The 1997 globe on top is the same exact size as the 2012 globe under it. So how did the United States quadruple in size in 15 years? There's the United States. Let's turn it to the top of the globe. Now let's rotate it a quarter more so it's in the middle of the other side of the globe. Now a quarter more so it's on the dead bottom of the globe. Now one last rotation to bring it back where it started. And there it isn't. That's India, China, and Russia. Let's turn it again. Surely it must be back by now. Nope, that's Greenland. One more turn and the Earth has gone around 1.5 times its alleged circumference. And there it is. It should have passed once by already and be on the other side again, but that is because they have to add Fantasy Island, which isn't really there. Now where have we seen that before? Ah yes, there is truly nothing new under the sun. Google Earth is just the digital updated version of this same nonsense back in 1482.
Dismantled and ready for a long sea voyage.
We'll then start the final screening process, and we'll get you to take your extreme cold weather jackets off.
But now, the Anduril team gathers at Christchurch, New Zealand for the 6-hour flight to Antarctica in a C-17 cargo plane, jam-packed with people and gear.
The Anduril team are taking an ice drill from Christchurch, New Zealand to McMurdo Station off the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica in a C-17 cargo plane. Just to get your bearings, McMurdo is alleged to be down there on the Ross Ice Shelf in the South Pacific Ocean, where New Zealand is, not to be confused with the Rana Ice Shelf up there by the Antarctic Peninsula in the South Atlantic Ocean, where New Zealand is nowhere near. So the obvious route on a globe is a straight shot south from Christchurch, New Zealand to McMurdo Station, which is allegedly around 2,340 miles. The C-17 claims an impressive fully loaded cruising speed of 450 knots or 518 miles per hour. So it could make that distance in 4.5 hours, but obviously goes slower for takeoff and landing. The first question is, on a 6-hour trip, does it take an hour and a half, 45 minutes on each side, or 1/4 of the entire flight time to get up to and come back down from cruising speed for takeoff and landing? The second question is, if this is the shortest flight route from New Zealand, why did the BBC spend a ton of time and money on graphics and a narrative about an alleged mountain range they wouldn't even pass over to show them coming in over the Antarctic Peninsula and Rana ice shelf in the South Atlantic Ocean to come all the way back to McMurdo in the South Pacific?
Their flight passes over the Trans-Antarctic Mountains.
That's the Antarctic Peninsula, that's the Rana ice shelf, and that's the South Atlantic Ocean,
which divide the continent into two regions, with colossal glaciers called ice sheets blanketing both. The giant East Antarctic ice sheet is 10 times the size of the West. It's frozen firmly to bedrock, high above the sea, and in some places, the ice towers almost 3 miles into the sky.
Why would you even mention any of that if you were supposed to take the yellow route, not their claimed red route? In reality, they really did this. Follow the yellow brick road from Christchurch straight to McMurdo and the real location of the Ross Ice Shelf, as we'll get into with Southern Longitude impossibilities on the globe model.
Some people call it Earth's freezer, but scientists call Antarctica the ice.
Antarctica plays a fundamental role in the way the Earth functions.
For polar researchers, Antarctica is a giant laboratory more than 1.5 times the size of the United States, and home to 90% of all the ice in the world.
I would definitely agree on the Gleason map that the ice wall is at least 90% of all the ice in the world and plays a fundamental role in the way the Earth functions by holding in and containing the waters of the realm. But that ice wall is clearly a hell of a lot more than just 1.5 times the size of that tiny little United States. When we use the tool to trace out anywhere in the world on Google Earth, like the United States seen in yellow around it, we can get a rough perimeter and area, like here, showing the United States to have a perimeter of roughly 9,361 miles and an area inside of that about 3.1 million square miles. And yet, funny enough, the only place on all of Google Earth you aren't allowed to do that is, surprise, surprise, Fantasy Island, Antarctica. It suddenly draws in this fictional circle, both outside of the alleged coastal area you traced in detail, and even way inside where you traced, and gives you a perimeter of 11,550 miles, much less than the alleged 1.5 times the United States, 9,361 miles, short by 2,500 miles, and gives you an area of 5 million square miles, which is 350,000 square miles more than it should be, not less. But how does that work? And they won't tell you if that's the fake circle they drew or the outline you did, as they leave it up to you and don't clarify. Clearly a deception, because as we've already shown multiple times, this fantasy island cannot and does not exist. And the fact that it clearly has a lie purposely programmed into Google Earth software means you cannot trust it does not have the same deception programmed into tracing southern hemisphere continents to hide their actual size as well, as we'll get into. Even their cover story of how it was theoretically created is ridiculous. Their cool story goes, the Earth's polar regions are cold because their positions at the top and bottom of the planet do not allow them to receive direct light from the sun, even though it is allegedly 93 million miles away and allegedly lights up the entire planets all the way out to Pluto, allegedly 3.7 billion miles farther away from Earth. But since the Earth's alleged axis is tilted at 23.5 degrees, the incoming solar radiation that warms the planet strikes them obliquely rather than vertically. As a result, the poles receive only 40% as much incident radiation as equatorial regions. The rest of that incident radiation goes out to Pluto instead.
To us, it might seem almost a stage awaiting actors. But the human drama came slowly to the icy continent. Antarctica's interior was not reached until the 20th century. Why did it take so long for curious and expansionist peoples to lay claim to this wilderness? The seeds of Antarctica's inaccessibility were sown millions of years ago.
Yet there's your alleged globe's 60 degrees south latitude Antarctic circle in red. Millions of years ago, in scale and proportion, supposed to be frozen due to the alleged 23.5 degree tilt of the Earth, blocking 60% of its incident solar radiation. Yet 1/4 of this supercontinent, the entire rest of the Earth as we know it, in that red circle, was magically lush and green?
When the supercontinent, Gondwanaland, drifted apart to form the continents that we recognize today.
Now you can see it more clearly, that white ring there.
The last fragmental piece to break apart was Australia and Antarctica, which broke apart and created the great Southern Ocean which encircles Antarctica today.
Then why is it lit up like Florida and not already frozen if it was already down there in that 60% deficient solar radiation zone before it allegedly broke apart?
Once Antarctica was surrounded completely by ocean, it cut itself off from the rest of the Earth's weather patterns, and as Antarctica drifted over the South Pole, it became cold and could not receive warmer weather from up north. And so this is really the reason how Antarctica went into the deep freeze about 40 million years ago.
This piece off here and put it over here. And now you see the United States is no longer in the middle of the map.
Right.
Now I did this with a major record company in New York City, I think in 1970. And an older man stood up in the back of the room and said, "Now Elliot, you've gone too far." I said, "What's your problem?" "You can't do that with the map." I said, "Well, actually you can." He said, "No, the United States isn't in the middle of the map anymore." I said, "The United States never was in the middle of the map. You need to realize this depends on how you draw your map." And then I pointed this little fact out to him. South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland.
You mean just like the Gleason map here?
Even though it doesn't really look like it.
No, it is! South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland.
It's crazy.
Now, according to your social studies teachers, what is the equator? Halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole on this map would be right about here.
Right.
And that means that Iowa has a semi-tropical climate.
Yeah.
Well, you've been in Minnesota in the wintertime.
I've been in Iowa too. It's definitely
You know that it doesn't have a tropical climate. So you have to then introduce a real version of the map of the world. I think this is the one.
That's very good.
The Peters projection map. The sizes on this map are right. The shapes are distorted. Look at Greenland on this map. Right there. See it?
Yeah, it's really tiny.
See how small that is?
Right.
Look at it on the Mercator projection.
So why do they do that? I don't understand.
Why? Because the Pope commissioned Mercator to make a map that shows the spread of Christianity. So all the countries in which there are predominantly white people are larger than those in the southern part of the world, halfway between the North Pole and South.
The world map. And this is wrong. What if I told you that from here to here, it's 6,400 kilometers, but from here to here, which only looks like half the size, is 7,200. The continent of Africa has been shown smaller than it actually is. What if I told you that Greenland was only this size? Or Russia was this size? And US and Canada were not small. You know what? This is the real map. Look at Sweden, Finland, and Norway. They're much smaller now. But Greenland is tiny.
I received a comment from a sub in regard to their trip on the Trans-Australian Railway from Kalgoorlie to Port Augusta across the Nullarbor Desert. The company itself claims it to be only 650 miles across. Mapping it on Google Earth claims 1,044 miles. Wikipedia says 1,050 miles, and Google itself says 967 miles straight shot across the water, or 1,162 miles driving the Route 1. How does the company think their railroad is 400 miles shorter than everyone else says it is? On Gleason's map, that distance would be 1,520 miles across. That's 358 miles more than Google and 469 miles more than Wikipedia. Why can't anyone agree who is correct, and how could they hide this if Gleason is correct? As they wrote, I took the train across Australia's Nullarbor Desert and had a sleeper car, which I thought was strange as the desert is not that wide, at least allegedly on the globe with converging longitude lines in the south. When it got dark, the train went faster, so much that I couldn't sleep, so it was loud and bumpy and swaying. I became scared, and the conductor said the train always speeds up at night. I believe they hide the stretched desert, making the Gleason map showing correct. I have talked to people crossing the Nullarbor Desert by car, and they said it took too long. Planes crossing the width of Australia might not be showing passengers their true speed. Whenever we drove in Western Australia, it took too long and we speeded. I believe their road signs are manipulated to not show their proper distances. This is obviously just hearsay and opinion, but Gleason ran into the same thing provably and factually with actual sea charts and navigation logs from a dozen steamship captains and navigators in the late 1800s, working the steamer ship routes between Cape Town on the southern tip of Africa on the right and Buenos Aires, Argentina, as well as Cape Horn, Chile on the southern tip of South America, as we'll examine shortly in detail. But Dave Weiss and I also ran into the same exact anomaly as Gleason recently that matches every single Antarctic exploration journey on record from the late 1500s to the mid-1900s, which we'll get into, when we recently interviewed a whistleblower from a top-secret multinational mining base nicknamed as Tigo, somewhere in the vicinity of McMurdo Station near the Ross Ice Shelf. Deep Throat was taken, so we're calling this person Frostbite.
So I want to start out with, tell Steve about your journey as in much detail as you can, where you went from and how you got to the Tigo base.
So I'm like, all right. So I've been washing and freezing my ass for, I don't know, like four weeks and shit. So now we get back, and then we got back for a little bit on orders at the base, and then we went down to Florida. From Florida, we caught a boat. We went down south, down by, I think we stopped over in Colombia, then we caught another boat, and then we went to Antarctica. Went to McMurdo?
Well, McMurdo's on the other side by New Zealand. That's why I was going to ask if you went from New Zealand, because down by if you were down at the tip of South America, those bases are called Rothera, San Martin, Vernadsky, Mariambo.
Oh, no, we didn't go there.
So are you saying you were close to McMurdo?
Yeah.
But you took a boat from the west side of South America or the north or the east side? From Miami, you sailed down what? The east coast of Or did they fly you somewhere?
Oh, we went down to Colombia. Yeah. We were port in Cartagena. Then we went to north, south, east, west coast of Colombia.
Okay.
And then we caught another boat there. And we're on that boat for a while. And we ended up at McMurdo.
How long were you on that boat for? Like
a while. This is going back 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Is it
like
days,
10 days or
hours?
something. Like 10 days or long. 20 days, like approximately.
Oh, it's probably about 2 weeks.
2 weeks on a boat. Okay, yeah.
And what kind of boat was it?
U.S. military boat.
Yeah. And was it making time?
What do you mean making time?
Was it moving fast, or was it just lollygagging?
I just get on the boat. Yeah, I'm not the captain. You know what I mean?
But they were driving the whole time, basically.
Yes.
You weren't just floating around there having lunch.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
That wasn't our first stop either. McMurdo wasn't our first stop.
Oh, you stopped at other places in Antarctica, or you mean on the way to Antarctica? Okay.
Do you know where you
stopping off at islands? Were you anywhere by? Do you know if you were by the French Polynesian Islands by any chance, or Hawaii, or anything like that? Did it seem like you were in like the South Pacific?
Yeah, no. I think we stopped in Hawaii. Then was the Philippines? No.
Yeah. Hawaii. Yeah.
Hawaii. Then I think the Philippines. And I think there may have been one more stop, and then probably Antarctica.
That sound, yeah, because are you a flat earther?
Kind of, but not really.
Okay. Obviously, on the alleged globe, on a U.S. military boat that cruises about 30 to 35 miles per hour from the northwest side of Colombia to McMurdo Base, it's literally a straight shot dead south around the west coast of South America and the west coast of Antarctica straight to McMurdo Station. Allegedly 6,800 miles, give or take, so about 8 days of sailing and half of that in the icy cold Antarctic seas. It would be preposterous on a globe to instead go that same distance northwest to Hawaii, away from Antarctica, instead of straight south right to it. Then do that again straight west to the Philippines, getting even further away from Antarctica, and then go all the way south around the total other side of Fantasy Island, maybe even stopping one more time on the way, and taking at least 2 weeks or more. But on the Gleason map, that's exactly the way to go to McMurdo from the west coast of Colombia, minus the detour to the Philippines, unless you had to pick something up there on the way that the base needed. Which way would you drive from Chicago to New Orleans, the yellow route or the blue route? Steamship captains, officers, and navigators were running into these same nonsensical globe distance impossibilities back in the late 1800s. When we just compare South Sea steamers built in Europe by the same class of builders and building companies as their Northern Sea steamer counterparts, and keep in mind, as far as danger or contingencies are concerned, in making these voyages in an equal time, the one preferred to the other, the South Atlantic Sea has the advantage over the North Atlantic, as shown on navigators' charts in terms of currents, rocks, shoals, islands, wind swells, etc. So here we'll compare the North Atlantic steamer route between New York and Southampton, England, the blue arrow, to the same ships making the more favored South Atlantic routes between the Cape of Good Hope in Cape Town, South Africa, to Buenos Aires, Argentina, shown in orange, and also between there and Cape Horn in Chile, shown in yellow. Keep in mind, sea charts are done in nautical miles, which are larger, or 1.150779 times the size of a regular mile. So if 1 degree is 69 regular miles, it's only 60 nautical miles, and hence ship speeds are done in knots, which are simply nautical miles per hour, not regular miles per hour. So your car driving 69 miles per hour is really only driving 60 knots. Google Earth is showing, sure enough, New York to Southampton, England in the North Atlantic at roughly 3,038 nautical miles apart. Pretty identical by 22 miles to the 3,060 nautical miles from this ship log from the North Deutscher, a Lloyd steamship doing the same route. Even despite rough head seas and swells on days 2 and 3 and the difficulty of sailing the North Atlantic, this ship made that 3,060 nautical miles in 6 days, 17 hours, and 15 minutes, or just call it 6 days and 18 hours of actual sailing time without the fictional time zone changes added in. That put it at an average speed of 18.36 knots, or nautical miles per hour. So their 6 days and 18 hours is right up there with the fastest routes from these other 4 ships doing the exact same route in 4 hours less to 4 hours more, but always 6.5 days to an hour and a half under 7 days for 3,060 nautical miles. No more, no less. Showing all of these ships average 18 to 19 nautical miles per hour. So here's the first problem. The globes in the late 1800s were measuring the distance from the Cape of Good Hope in Cape Town, South Africa to Buenos Aires, Argentina as 60 degrees times 60 nautical miles per degree, or 3,600 nautical miles. Google Earth is now measuring that distance as 3,707 nautical miles, 100 nautical miles longer than the old globes used to claim, or 5.5 hours longer of needed sailing time at 18 nautical miles per hour to get there. And those old globes were putting the Cape of Good Hope to Cape Horn, Chile, at 3,420 nautical miles, while Google Earth now claims 3,601 nautical miles, 160 nautical miles more, or nearly 9 more hours of sailing time at 18 knots. But you say, yeah, well, GPS is more accurate than primitive globes, duh. Well, Gleason corresponded with dozens of captains, navigators, and officers working on these routes, like Charles B. Brown, who was the second officer on the steamships Lochinvar and Palgrave, and even the Abbeytown, a special high-speed merchantman-class ship built by the East Indies Company for this specific route. Like the others, Brown provided his certificate license, discharge certificates, and validation letters from his captains. He also worked on the steamship Comte, which did these routes as well. And Brown submitted the charts he used on the steamships Lochinvar, Abbeytown, Comte, and the Palgrave, and is very clear the distances we are about to discuss are in all cases worked to nautical miles, not regular miles. Problem number 1. His charts from Cape Town to Buenos Aires from multiple ships and years of running the route show the distance between these two at 4,560 nautical miles. But Google Earth and GPS claim it is only 3,707 nautical miles. You can see the little NM there when you double check. That's 853 nautical miles less than the Admiralty charts and Mercator sailing charts they use to get there like clockwork in reality. And the globes of his day were worse. They claimed the distance was only 3,600 nautical miles, 960 nautical miles less in globe theory than actually sailing reality and experience. If the globe were reality, that would mean all of Brown's ships and years of sailing this route would have actually started on the east coast of Africa, sailed over land somehow, sailed across the ocean, and then sailed over land again on the other side, landing halfway in the middle of South America. Even worse, in blue, Brown's best time record between the two that he knew of on all of the ships that he sailed was the steamship Lochinvar under Captain Shelley, which made that trip in 13 days, 13 hours, and 45 minutes, or we'll just call it 13 days and 14 hours. 13 days times 24 hours per day is 312 hours, plus the extra 14 hours more is 326 hours total sailing time. Can you see the problem here? That's the speed record, the fastest he knew of, for what Google Earth alleges to be only 3,707 nautical miles across, and the old globes allege only 3,600 nautical miles. Divided by the 326 hours total sailing time means the fastest ship was only averaging 11 to 11.3 nautical miles per hour, even though the South Seas are faster to sail in. Yet in the north, the same exact class ships from the same builders were doing the 3,060 nautical mile routes from New York to Southampton in only 6 days and 12 hours and averaging 18 to 19 nautical miles per hour in slower seas. Think about that. A steamship takes 6.5 days to travel 3,060 nautical miles from New York to Southampton. Hell, let's call it just under 7 days for the Augusta Victoria, the fourth fastest northern ship. But then in the south, the fastest ship has to go only 647 measly nautical miles more to make Buenos Aires from Cape Town. Let's say at the slowest 18 nautical miles per hour average speed is only 35 hours longer. It should be there in just under 8.5 days, but yet the record is over 13.5 days. It takes 5 entire days more to travel the extra 647 nautical miles after making the first 3,060 in only 6.5 days. Then Brown's Admiralty and Mercator's sailing charts, plus his actual experiential years of sailing times, show that the distance from Cape Town to Cape Horn at the bottom of South America in Chile is 5,700 nautical miles. Yet because it has to lie to make the globe longitude lines converge together at the bottom of the globe, Google Earth is claiming that distance is only 3,601 nautical miles, now off by a whopping 2,099 nautical miles from actual sailing reality, not just 100 nautical miles like Buenos Aires. And the old globe put that distance at only 3,420 nautical miles, even shorter than the Google Earth fiction, making a whopping difference of 2,280 nautical miles error between globe theory and actual sailing reality. The obvious question is, if all of Brown's working logs and navigator maps show Cape Town to Cape Horn is really 5,700 nautical miles long in reality, that's 1,140 nautical miles farther than the 4,560 nautical miles from Cape Town to Buenos Aires. So how is it the steamship Abbeytown under Captain Tullis made the 1,140 nautical mile longer record trip to Cape Horn in just 13 days and 23 hours, just half a day more than the Lochinvar made Buenos Aires over a much shorter distance? And the answer is the Abbeytown was a much faster steamship than the Lochinvar, built specially by the East India government for this special trip only. It was the fastest innovative trade ship of its kind at that day in the South, so it's like asking how a Nazi Messerschmitt jet was faster than the dominant British Spitfire propeller fighter in World War II. But the real question we have to ask is, if Google Earth says Cape Town to Cape Horn is only 3,601 nautical miles across, only 541 nautical miles farther than it claims New York to Southampton, then how is it the fastest frickin' steamship in the south, the Abbeytown, still took 13 days and 23 hours, let's call it 14 days, in the better, faster southern seas to go only 541 nautical miles farther than the steamships in the north were doing, 541 nautical miles less, in only 6.5 to 7 days at their fastest? How can it take a ship 6.5 to 7 days to go this far and then take 7 to 7.5 days more to go just this much farther? Obviously, it can't on a globe with converging longitude lines as you go south. But if you live here, you can see 5 zones of longitude in the north inside the equator from New York to Southampton is exponentially shorter than 5 zones of diverging longitude as you get further south or away from the center and towards the ice wall, which explains why it takes twice as long in reality than the globe fantasy claims that distance really is out there. Even more damning, because of converging longitude, the old globes in yellow said Cape Town to Cape Horn was 160 miles shorter than Cape Town to Buenos Aires. Brown himself said, "Furthermore, I am very much surprised to learn from you that Cape Horn is 200 nautical miles nearer Cape Town than Buenos Aires. I don't take points when working these questions, but degrees of latitude and longitude." Rightly so, as his own actual sailing experience in green put Cape Horn at 1,140 nautical miles further than Buenos Aires, not 160 nautical miles shorter. Brown said, "And if the following latitudes and longitudes are wrong, then the Admiralty charts in my possession are wrong," and then gave those Admiralty chart coordinates for all 3 locations, which we will check against Google Earth to bust them lying. And please take notice that the questions worked for you were done so by using Mercator's sailing chart, which is our usual way of finding course and distance from point to point. So going to Brown's Admiralty chart coordinates for Cape Town, 3424 south, 1832 east, without having seconds to get it exact, Google Earth plots it roughly there, a little off but close enough for horseshoes, still the Cape of Good Hope. Then Buenos Aires at 3430 south, 5800 west, puts it there. Again, close enough for navigation, not off by hundreds or thousands of nautical miles and 7 extra days of sailing. And lastly, Cape Horn at 5559 south, 6712 west, and that one is even a dead bullseye ringer. So there was clearly nothing wrong with Brown's Admiralty charts. If you are claiming Google Earth is correct and more accurate, and they pretty much match exactly. So how can Brown's charts have the same exact coordinates as Google Earth, but then Brown's Admiralty charts, Mercator map, and real-life experience work out Cape Town to Buenos Aires at 4,560 nautical miles, and Google Earth claims the same 2 exact coordinates are only 3,707. That's 853 nautical miles less than that. Or Cape Town to Cape Horn being 5,700 nautical miles in reality, and Google Earth claiming the same exact 2 identical coordinates are only 3,601. That's 2,099 nautical miles less. They should all match each other very closely, but they don't. Buenos Aires is supposed to be way down there, well below the Tropic of Capricorn, but keeping Fantasy Island down there at the bottom where it is alleged to be and resetting to due north, it's now magically sticking Buenos Aires just under the dead middle equator of the sphere. Impossible with Antarctica still centered there in the bottom. By the way, the globe theory says the Earth spins west to east at just over 1,000 miles per hour, or 1,470 feet per second at the equator. But the reason you don't jump up a foot off the ground there for 1 second and end up landing 4.5 football fields west of you is because the whole air and atmosphere are moving in sync together with the alleged globe's spin. Must be all of those equipotential gravity bong water particles in the air. But that would mean both the north and south of the alleged globe are also spinning west to east, and their atmospheres should also be magically attached to the ground. But every navigator knows about the westerly trade winds in the north and the opposite easterly roaring 40s winds in the south. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It should all move together with the alleged theoretical globe spin, but it doesn't in reality. But these opposite winds are exactly what you experience on the etheric toroidal field Earth we discussed in part 1. As you can see here, when a magnet and electric currents are used to induce a toroidal field. The inside hyperbola spins in one direction, your westernly northern trade winds, and the outside torus field or donut spins the opposite direction, your easternly roaring 40s winds. Just as we see when people living on the equator face east and time-lapse star trails, the ones on the left in the northern inner hyperboloid hourglass appear to move one direction in much tighter circular shaped spirals, and the ones on the right in the outer southern torus or donut appear to move the opposite direction of the ones on the left, but in much looser and wider oval shaped spirals. But the fixed stars travel overhead at night from east to west across the ecliptic. So on a globe, which claims the west to east spinning of the globe is what is making the fixed, faraway, unmoving stars appear to go overhead from east to west at night as you spin towards them, then if you are living on the equator facing east, all of these stars from there should look like this, going straight over you and behind you as you spin towards and under them. But as always, that's not what happens in reality. And then just like their fake long distances, Google Earth has the audacity to draw in massive continent-sized clouds like this one, running south to north from Fantasy Island to India, apparently made out of steel and iron, to defy the atmosphere that is supposed to be flying west to east with the globe spin and drag you along with it while you jump up in the air. But not these clouds, though, because they are as much of a digital fiction as Fantasy Island there. My contention is that Google Earth is somehow programmed to be absolutely accurate over very short distances, like across cities and towns in the alleged southern hemisphere, but is clearly fudging numbers over long distances to make reality seem to fit into their fantasy. I have a theory on how they may be doing this. I put the grid lines on Google Earth to show the yellow Tropic of Capricorn. Keep in mind that yellow line looks curved to represent 3D around an alleged globe, but it represents a dead straight line east to west across Australia at the tropic, and then did a detailed zoom in west coast to east coast measurement of the tropic across Australia. But as I used the measuring tool, it didn't follow the yellow tropic line straight across as I asked it to. It drew that red line south of the tropic and said 2,346 miles across. Same starting and ending points precisely, but just as we discussed on a globe, the farther south you measure across the same longitude lines, the longitude lines are converging closer together to get shorter apart further south. So that red line is shorter than the yellow tropic line, since it is measuring 100 miles south of the Tropic of Capricorn. But I didn't ask it to measure that red line. I asked it to measure that yellow line, and it drew and measured in that red line, claiming that distance is only 2,346 miles across to match the converging globe longitudes, whereas Gleason's map would put that yellow line distance at 3,202 miles across. Preposterous, you say. That's 36% larger. That's exactly what Captain Brown said when he learned his actual physical sailing distances were the same versus the globe distance claims of his day. And just like all the engineering projects, when reality doesn't match the globe model, it's not looking good for Fantasy Island. Gleason's map itself is based on almanac coordinates and land maps of his day, and as he said, and I'll show you, nobody has ever been past 78 or 80 degrees south latitude. His map is stopping at 90 degrees south only because the globe latitude-longitude grid system demands there are 180 degrees of latitude down a longitude line from the North Pole to the South Pole or ice wall edge. That's where the system comes from. All the great ancient mariner nations came from that yellow 45-degree north circle, and noticed from that circle they all saw Polaris, the North Star, at 45 degrees altitude north in the sky every night, and all saw the sun at 45 degrees altitude at solar noon on the March 21st and September 21st equinoxes, like this. So they stuck the equator ring there and then just assumed that distance must double equally, since colonies out there were also charting the sun at 45 degrees north on March 21st and September 21st equinoxes. So they knew that distance to the equator was equal to the yellow 45-degree ring to the equator. So they just assumed there must be one more going out, and that must be the South Pole or edge of the Earth, even though nobody had ever even been out there to make certain. In reality, the sun never leaves the ecliptic belt between the green Cancer and blue Capricorn rings, but the ice could go on for who knows how much farther than 90 degrees south. The concept of 90 degrees south is a Newtonian physics globe theory and assumption, not a proven fact. Speaking of, let's take a modern look at the actual flights for the bogus final experiment itself. This is their body cam footage of their flight from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier. You can see this is a Boeing 757-200 series by the unique bent-up wingtip and those three triangular pieces there. Just like here on another Boeing 757-200 series. You can see from the website here that is indeed the airplane used from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier. The Boeing 757-200 series is designed with an optimal cruising speed, not top speed, of Mach 0.8 or 593 miles per hour. The obvious and familiar problem is, according to Google Earth, from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier is only 1,876 miles. Yet their flight and all of the others using that same plane take 4 hours and 15 minutes, which would mean on a globe that plane was only averaging 441 miles per hour when it is built to cruise at 593 miles per hour, 152 miles per hour faster. Obviously, there is takeoff and landing to consider, but there is zero reason an airline would slow down to a turtle crawl and then take an extra hour to make a flight it could make in just over 3 hours at its normal cruising speed. 593 miles per hour times 4.25 hours is 2,520 miles. That's 644 miles maximum. They should have overshot Union Glacier, nearly reaching the alleged South Pole. But take your pick, allowing for slower takeoff and landing speeds. 500 miles there, 400 miles there. That's still too far. Many people have questioned if they were 200% certain they were really brought there. I have to assume they brought GPS gear and all verified each other. You do have to find it strange to put a tourist destination in a dangerous glacier range out in the middle of frickin' nowhere with deadly crevasses all around so you can't explore, and if there is a medical emergency, there isn't another base around for 350 miles to helicopter airlift you to, when there are 17 international bases up there on that peninsula. But here's where it gets interesting. As I showed you, that plane could have flown 2,520 miles in 4 hours and 15 minutes just at its normal cruising speed, and they can fly much faster and farther if needed, but let's assume they didn't. Again, the Gleason map is a semi-projection longitude and sun time calculator, not geometrically in scale. So you can't just measure that yellow dotted line across from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier and get an exact figure. That latitude is constant, but the longitude is constantly changing. You can't measure a third side of a triangle where one of the other sides is 6 inches and the second side is changing from 6 inches to 12 inches along the way without advanced ratio trigonometry and multiple other points. But what you can do is take the 11.67 degrees of longitude between the airport and Union Glacier, and you see 11.67 longitude degrees would be 1,283 miles going straight west of the airport's latitude and 1,526 miles going along Union Glacier's latitude. But you have to figure in the 1,845 miles of latitude distance between them. But the plane doesn't fly west like this and then south like that, or south like this and then west like that. It's covering both latitude and longitude at the same time, or rather taking a shortcut. Suddenly, 2,520 miles starts to look a lot more reasonable on the Gleason map than overshooting Union Glacier by 400 to 644 miles. Again, these planes can fly faster, and since we don't know how fast they actually flew, I can't call it definitive, but it's just one more data set not in the Globe's or Fantasy Island's favor, light in the sky or not. In my opinion, if you want a real final experiment, 2 sailing yachts take off from New Zealand at the same port, one southeast, one southwest, both maintaining the same average speed or as close as possible. When they get down or out to 50 south latitude, the yellow ring on either model, no polar seas, no ice, no compass anomalies, nada, just smooth sailing, they each carry on that bearing and will meet each other on the other side. Even if either one of them gets a day or 4 or 5 of terrible weather or winds, the Globe says that is 16,038 miles around 50 south latitude. So they should meet somewhere around there after only 8,019 miles. The Gleason map says 50 south latitude would be 38,804 miles around, meeting over there on the other side after 19,402 miles, more than 2.25 times as far and long to travel than the Globe. Just like the steamship records we just discussed, and the documented Antarctic expeditions from the 1580s to 1890s we haven't discussed yet, but that's none of my business. Either way, that's more than double as long as each other, and easy to figure out their average agreed knots per hour. Even taking a cruising yacht from its usual 30 miles per hour down to a crawl at 20 miles per hour, that's 40.5 days to meet in the middle on the Gleason map. Yeah, exactly half that, but probably just a coincidence. And only 16.75 days on the Globe. Even with bad weather, that would be definitive either way and prove or disprove Fantasy Island. Speaking of, there is a very curious thing that despite all of these Antarctic bases, plus more not shown here, with the exception of Ruskaya there are not nor have there ever been any bases along this entire stretch and bulge of Fantasy Island, from about 125 west longitude down to about 165 west longitude on the Globe Fantasy Island, and even more, 125 west to 180 west on the Gleason map until it crosses the international date line and east-west longitude divider. More curious is that while Fantasy Island has 125 to 165 west longitude bulging out into the Arctic Ocean, it's the one place on the entire ice wall around the Earth that Gleason has the ice wall indenting inwards past the 75 south latitude ring and even 80 south latitude ring, away from the Arctic Ocean, not bulging out into it, as we'll get into in the sunlight section. But even more curious is when we look at this same exact 125 to 165 west longitude range in the northern hemisphere, the Bering Strait, and the mysterious international date line. Allegedly, the most eastern part of Russia and the most western part of Alaska meet at that red line, divided by water with two islands in the middle called the Bering Strait. It's alleged to only be 53 miles from Russia to Alaska there, and about 20 miles from either side to the islands between them, which are only a few miles away from each other, and yet the international date line runs right through the middle of those two islands and claims there is a 1 day plus 3 hour time difference between those few miles between those two tiny islands. You can understand the 24 hours because they have to divide the dates somewhere for international commerce, but where does the extra 3 hour difference come from? That's the difference between the red, yellow, and green time zones across most of the United States. So how does that work between two islands only a few miles apart? Well, on a globe, you have to convince everyone that all of this yellow diverging or expanding land and water outside of the equator fits equally on the bottom of a converging globe, as only this much yellow fits on its equal top of that globe. So somewhere, you need black magic to make people think that this is the same size as that. Isn't it obvious? And hope most people are too stupid to figure it out, which they are. And as it turns out, black magic is actually as simply stupid as this. Time works based on the smooth, predictable cycles of the sun between the tropics over the sacred ecliptic S-shaped sine wave. So there you go. You've probably noticed they cleverly hide this by just cutting all world maps off in half right exactly there between eastern Russia and western Alaska and keep them on opposite sides from each other and just hope you don't ask questions like, hey, if the distance from eastern Russia there to there and then across to western Alaska over there is only 53 miles, as Google Earth says, and even lets me measure it here, and that's New Zealand down there, which Google Earth says is 877.5 miles long, not 53 miles, and yet clearly I could turn New Zealand sideways and move it up here and still not even reach the right side of this map, which shows oceans, not Alaska, which should be kissing it and look like it's almost touching at this scale. How the hell does that work? And the answer is, it doesn't. That's how magic works. It's not real. It's just you don't bother to think how the trick is done to make it seem real. You can't insert 3 hours of fictional longitudinal land that doesn't exist on top of your fake globe and then build actual physical bases on its identical, equally fictional, non-existent longitudinal globe counterpart on the bottom in SCAMTARCTICA. But the real truth might be much darker than that, literally.
The Antarctic can also be unbelievably beautiful, with refracted light causing false suns and moons. With refracted light causing false suns and moons.
It is a perplexing thing that aside from the alleged Amundsen Scott South Pole base there are no bases inside the 80-degree south latitude ring on either the globe model or outside of it in the blue ring area on the Gleason map ice wall. Which is strange, because even though nobody's ever even been there to prove it, the theoretical geomagnetic South Pole is alleged to be right there inside it. So you would think there would be an international scientific base there studying it. But nope. The closest base is Vostok, outside the ring at 78 degrees 27 minutes south latitude. Even in the Antarctic summer months of November through late January, where there is an alleged 24-hour sun to warm the seas, and both the Ross Ice Shelf and Rana Ice Shelf penetrate well inside the alleged 80 degrees south latitude ring, so icebreaker ships should be able to get in there and explore. In the 1875 to 1889 ninth edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, when you read all of the documented South Polar explorations from 1567 to 1874, when Antarctic sea expeditions were given up completely, not a single expedition was able to get past the enormous insurpassable ice wall they all spoke about at 78 degrees 11 minutes south latitude, meaning inside of the alleged 80-degree polar circle ring. Even outside of 78 degrees, to the Antarctic Circle at 67 degrees south latitude, Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that at the same time as Dumont d'Urville in 1839, Commander Wilkes of the United States expedition made a cruise to the southward and mapped a large tract of land in the latitude of the 67 degrees south Antarctic Circle, for which he claimed the discovery. But as a portion of it had already been seen by Balleny and the rest has since been proven not to exist, the claim has not been admitted. Remarkable, as to this day that ring is still called the Southern Pole of Inaccessibility. What is more curious is that out of all of these expeditions, which all went in the summer southern months for the weather, there is not one single mention of any 24-hour sun in the sky, ever. Plenty of talk of that night, the next morning, the next day, a few days later, but you'd think somebody would mention a 24-hour sun during these months, but it's nowhere to be found. Were the Earth a globe, the longitude lines inside the Antarctic Circle could not exceed more than 30 miles wide per degree due to convergence, which times 360 degrees is only 10,800 miles around the Antarctic Circle. And yet, while the Challenger did not openly admit it had searched for the South Pole in vain, its record showed it sailed over 60,000 miles, the equivalent of 3 times around the alleged globe's circumference at the equator, never mind 5.5 times around the alleged South Polar Circle, and cost the government over $1 million without being able to say that it had been fortunate enough to ascertain the existence of any such wonderful locality. But that's none of my business. And it gets even weirder and more unbelievable when we flash forward to the journals and journeys from the alleged 1912 South Pole expeditions of both the Norwegian Amundsen and England's Captain Robert Falcon Scott. If the whole world is a stage, why would Antarctica be any different?
If you think flat Earth is ridiculous, consider this. A sextant is a navigation tool to measure angles between the horizon and celestial bodies, allowing sailors to find their exact location at sea. The trigonometry required for a sextant only works because the 3 points it measures create flat planes to each other. No adjustments for curvature, ever. If the Earth were a globe, the math wouldn't work. But it does, and the sextant has been used for centuries. Meanwhile, surveyors use laser levels over miles with zero curve correction. Train tracks run level for miles. Airplanes fly at flight levels, not arcs. Pilots calculate distances over a flat plane. And there are places where you can see too far, where the Earth's supposed curvature should hide distant objects below the horizon. And let's be real. Everyone knows the moon landing was fake. With a lie that big, NASA has no credibility, so why trust their story? Everything we build assumes a flat Earth.
To us, it might seem almost a stage awaiting actors.
The Scott Party didn't seem to have that clarity on the part of the leader of recognizing what the strengths and weaknesses of the individual men were.
Robert the Hidden Hand Scott was a career Royal Navy officer who made lieutenant in 1889, then immediately had a scandal where he suddenly disappeared from all naval records for 8 months. Then 2 years later, while commanding a torpedo boat, he accidentally ran it aground and gets into trouble, and then finds out his dad lost all the family fortune and he has no capital, and he has to support the whole extended family himself. So a promotion and the extra income became his main concern, making him a perfect, willing, and desperate dupe for a psyop. Luckily by fluke, Scott runs into the Royal Knighted Sir Clements Markham, president of the Royal Geographic Society, on a street in London, as you do, and the guy decides to put Scott in charge of commanding an expensive South Polar expedition despite zero experience, as you do. And before he even leaves on the first one, King Edward VII, there in white Templar crosses, gives Scott a 4th member knighthood of the Royal Victorian Order. Yes, that's the White Knights Templar Malta Cross, who run the world banking, commerce, copyright law scam for the Vatican and its Holy Roman appointed royal families, for being a distinguished lapdog of the monarchy and Vatican. But the expedition fails, one guy dies, half of them get scurvy. He brings back bogus meteorological and magnetic readings that are later criticized as amateurish and inaccurate. And once again, Scott gets his 2nd boat in his career run aground, stuck in the ice, and needs 2 relief ships to come down and save him. So what do? They promote him to the rank of captain. King Edward VII promotes him from 4th member to commander of the Royal Victorian Order, put him in charge as the assistant director of naval intelligence, and then he's hobnobbing with Queen Amelie of Orleans, Luis Felipe, the Prince Royal of Portugal, Sir Henry Keppel, the commander-in-chief of the entire British fleet, and even Prince Heinrich of Prussia. And then they send the guy back for another attempt at the South Pole, despite failing miserably the first time, as you do. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, King Haakon of Norway, seen here, wearing his same Knights of Malta Templar crosses as all the British, has hired Roald Amundsen to do the same and race Scott to the pole. But why this sudden mad rush to reach this alleged South Pole when it was already declared 35 years earlier that it didn't even exist and was pointless and too expensive for governments to keep trying? Then you have copyright law. So the Vatican, they own all of our souls due to their unum sanctum, their papal bull, and they have a copyright on the date, the place, and our name. So whenever you sign a contract, you have to sign your name, which is they make for you when you're born. That's your all caps name, your straw man. You have to date it because we're on their Pope Gregor calendar. They say today is whatever today is, April 7th, 2025, only on their calendar. They own that fiction. They own the time and they own the place. They say we live on this spinning ball. So they own your name, your date, and your place. That's called copyright. So any business or commerce you do, because the whole world is under commerce and all commerce goes to the Vatican. It's not the Jays, as everyone's trying to say. It's Zionists, and only 1 out of 10 Zionists are Jewish. The Jesuits set all that up. So they own the copyright.
Wrong
so
Jays.
if
people got the wrong Jays.
What's that?
People got the wrong Jays.
They got the wrong Jays. Yeah, they're looking for the other ones. It's not the Jesuits either. They work for the people in charge, but still. So they've got the copyright. If we don't live on their spinning ball and it's not really the date they say it is, they already have no more rights and claims to our taxes and our strawman. That they're out the window there. It's gone. So that's another reason people don't really talk about. That's how they own us. Is J.K. Rowling owns Harry Potter. I always say it. She owns the rights to the Hogwarts universe, and Harry Potter and Ron and Hermione in the time. So if you try to dress up like Harry Potter, you and me, and go out and like try to make money, you know, pretending we're doing Harry Potter appearances, we owe that chick money. And that's what we're doing. We're going out pretending to be our all caps name on a fake spinning ball in a fake universe that doesn't exist, on a fake calendar that doesn't exist. And we owe them money because we're doing that. We're making money off our name. Everything you've ever done with commerce, you signed your name and date. And it all happens in their fake universe. They own Harry Potterville, and that's where we are. We're in a fiction, and they own it. We're like characters trapped in a book or movie we can't get out of. So that's another reason that no one talks about. And they don't want us going out there because if we prove that we're not on this spinning space ball, their whole thing collapses there too, not just their sciences, but the commerce. And that's what they really love, is the money and control and power. Before you just take my word for it, ponder this. If you don't have a South Pole, you can't and don't live on a globe, as we've just shown for nearly 2 hours. So here you have the Norwegian and 2 British, the 3 polar stars, as it says on the bottom, the only quote-unquote proof of any South Pole, showing off their globe with their hidden hands. But did they really go to any such alleged South Pole? It is said that one of many reasons Amundsen's team beat Scott by a month and suffered no casualties is because he had learned how to properly dress from the Inuits in his North Polar expeditions, using animal furs and boots that were warm and waterproof but allowed breathing and no sweat. Yet the only alleged photographs or cartoon drawings of Amundsen's team at the pole show men wearing nothing of the sort. These are all the official photographs. And realize this, before the Kodak self-timer patented 7 years later in 1918, you only had the American Autopose patented in 1902, where you used a pump that would give you a little time to run around the camera and set up before the air pressure released and snapped the shutter. Scott's team only took 5 men to the pole, himself, Wilson, Bowers, Oates, and Evans. Yet there are always all 5 men in his pictures, yet all wearing big heavy gloves, and there are never any foot tracks from the camera to the guy who would have had to have pumped the autopose, then ran to the camera, put his gloves on, and grabbed his prop. So who took these pictures? There's even a picture of their return journey home with all 5 men. So we are to believe they set this pump, then somehow skied 30 feet away, picked up the sled ropes, and all did an action pose? There are no tracks leading to the sled or where they would have had to have started to be in that final position when that picture finally snapped. Then we have loads of strange inconsistencies, like many sources claiming Scott's team reached the pole January 17th, when his own journal, which I'll post the entire thing in the notes folder, claims they got there the next day on January 18th. Now wonder me this, Amundsen's team starts here, Scott's team starts here, 451 miles away from each other. Scott's journal shows them taking constant bearings, and you can see on any of the many maps comparing them, they all make these little detours through the mountains, but then they have these fairly dead straight shots toward the pole from 2 completely different directions. Scott's journal says at noon Tuesday, January 16th, they are at 8942 South Latitude, about 20.7 miles from the alleged pole, and there's Amundsen's route over there in the orange. Scott's team marches 2 hours and suddenly spot what they thought was a cairn way off in the distance. I'm going to be generous and give them 6.3 miles for 2 hours, more than twice as far as their usual speed for that, pulling a big sledge. And then they detect a black speck up straight ahead, which they march to and find it was a black flag tied to a sled nearby the remains of Amundsen's camp. So here's the problem. They are here after the 2-hour march, heading straight that way by strict readings, Amundsen's team was coming in the opposite direction over there, more than 7.3 miles away, and Scott's team claimed they saw this even a half an hour earlier than that, so that's 8.5 miles away. So Amundsen's team a month earlier would not have been straight up ahead. They would have been 7.5 to 8.5 miles east of Scott, and the alleged Earth curvature would have been 35 to 50 feet between them. Even with the chord arc at 1/4 that is still 9 to 12.5 feet of curve to see over or even spot that little black flag on a sled, let alone from 8.5 miles away. And globies claim entire ships go over the horizon curve at less than 5 miles away. In fact, you need a Nikon P900 just to zoom in on a ship, never mind seeing a tiny flag with the naked eye or a tiny 4x optical handheld telescope. You can't have your cake and eat it too. This story stinks of the moon landings. I am not at all suggesting that these journeys and teams are total fictional fabrications. I'm suggesting these events may have really taken place here, and certain fictional embellishments were added later out of necessity, and I'll show you why. Just what if Gleason was correct, and Scott, Shackleton, and Wilson's failed 1901 to 1904 discovery expedition was actually a real South Pole attempt that had to stop at 82 south latitude, not because it wasn't intended to go any further, but because it wasn't possible to go any further. And then Shackleton returns on the Nimrod expedition in 1907 to 1909 and allegedly gets only 97 miles from the alleged South Pole and then just turns around and walks back 750 miles without making world history like the first man on the moon? Or is that a cover story? It should be blatantly obvious on a globe that whether you are Norwegian, English, or even French, like all of the early Antarctic explorers, the cheapest and quickest way to Antarctica, and the alleged South Pole for that matter, would be sailing straight down the Atlantic Ocean directly to the Rana ice shelf and a short march to the alleged South Pole, with no giant mountain range in the way to deal with. Not down there where they all really admittedly went. It would be ludicrous for those expeditions to spend tons of money, time, supplies, and 4 extra unnecessary months sailing through the Mediterranean Sea and the Suez Canal, across the entire Pacific Ocean, past Australia to New Zealand, then go down to the Ross Ice Shelf and make an even longer trek to the alleged South Pole with a huge mountain range in the way to go around. Yet that's exactly the way every single South Polar expedition went in history. Why? Because even the flat earthers have this wrong. The impenetrable barrier, aka ice wall, isn't the coast of the ice circle running around the flat earth plane of inertia, shown here in red, at roughly 67 south latitude. The ice wall is actually inland in the frozen icy water barrier, as Captain Ross told us about, at around 77 to 78 degrees south latitude, shown here in blue. And between the red waterline and blue ice wall are where we find all of the Antarctic bases around the ice shelf to this day, with the exception of the alleged South Pole base, which we'll get into. Scott said, the Great Ice Barrier was sighted and its examination recommenced in 7749 south latitude. The next day, the expedition obtained a latitude of 7810 degrees south, the highest ever reached before or since. Along the coast, as far as the eye could reach to the eastward, there was a perpendicular cliff of ice from 150 to 200 feet high, perfectly level at the top without any fissures or promontories on its seaward face. Captain Ross sailed along the marvelous wall of ice eastward in 7747 south latitude as far as 78 south latitude. This barrier was estimated to be 1,000 feet thick, and it was followed for 450 miles without a break. So the only place you could get on the whole damn thing without an airplane, helicopter, or 200-foot-tall hydraulic crane, which didn't exist back then, was the Ross Ice Shelf, which is here in reality. As Gleason said, imagine if you can the amount of centripetal force there must be concentrated to the center of a globe or sphere to hold these mighty walls of ice and mountains of frozen material in place, whereas there is no inward north or outward southern force on the still plane of inertia or rest in the center of a toroidal field. No such proven ice wall also exists around the entire North Pole. Kind of funny how Pangea forgot to create this ice wall around 77 to 78 north latitude and also left the water and much of the land inside of it unfrozen, unlike its alleged south latitude ring twin, Fantasy Island, which the globe theory just ignores because its model cannot explain or account for this. But the Bible does. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. He has compassed the waters with bounds until day and night come to end, meaning no 24-hour sun or sun at all past 80 degrees south latitude, as we'll get into. Wikipedia claims the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station is at 90 south latitude, 0 east latitude, where it should be on a globe. Time and date concurs. Date and time, however, has it listed at 89 degrees 59 minutes 51 seconds south latitude and 139:16:22 east longitude. You say, yeah, well, that's only 920 feet away, and that's reasonable, and I agree with that. But it's the east longitude we'll get into shortly. But when you go on to Google Earth and put in Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station, it takes you here. Not there where it's supposed to be, but here at 85 degrees 6 minutes south latitude, 0 west, and gives you all of these pretty pictures that could be taken anywhere at any time for all you know, to assure you that's what is really there. And we'll take a good look at that sign there. But weirdly, compared to where Google Earth alleges the geographical South Pole actually is, the base is just over 340 miles away northeast, which is very strange because Scott and Amundsen's detailed journals with daily longitude and latitude readings allege to have traveled roughly 850 miles from down there, northwest, from the direction of the Ross Ice Shelf, and Scott's whole team allegedly died on the way back there. So how can the alleged South Pole base now be 340 miles farther northeast? They walked 680 more miles further round trip at 8 to 12 miles per day with no extra supplies and didn't notice or write in their detailed journals that extra distance would have taken more than 2 months longer to travel at that speed and 40% more supplies that they didn't bring. Did both teams just magically teleport that massive extra distance? Wikitardia says they began their 862-mile return journey January 19th. Scott's own journal says, we have turned our back now on the goal of our ambition and must face our 800 miles of solid dragging. Well, I'm sorry, but that base is 1,224 miles from Scott's home base. Steve, you idiot, has it even occurred to you Google Earth might just be wrong? Yeah, that's what this whole film is pointing out, but not in this case. Because the alleged globe South Pole, there in blue lines, should be lined up quite a bit under that protruding bump there on the left, and then well around that curve up there, just left of that noticeable alleged protrusion on the Rana ice shelf there. And yet Google Earth has the alleged South Pole base in red lined up a little above the bottom of that protruding bump on the left and right under the beginning of the curve exiting the Rana ice shelf. Yet they show you a sign there in their images saying Geographic South Pole, with two quotes from Amundsen and Scott claiming that is exactly where they were, and yet have a picture with a star drawn exactly where Google Earth claims they are, in the red lines lined up a little above, across from the bottom of that protrusion on the left, and under the big curve leaving the Rana ice shelf. Exactly like the red there. Whereas the actual alleged geographical South Pole, according to Google Earth, should be 340 miles in the other direction, where the orange lines are, lined up quite a bit below that protruding bump on the left there, and well around that curve up there just left of that noticeable alleged protrusion on the Rana ice shelf there, just like the blue lines. But as I've already just shown you, that is impossible if you are to take Scott and Amundsen's journals and stories as true. They would have been nowhere near there ever. The alleged geographical pole would be 340 miles in the opposite direction of there. Screw your cake. Somebody is undeniably serving flat-out whoppers here. History is a set of lies agreed upon. Now, at this alleged Amundsen-Scott South Pole base, with the sign claiming it is the geographic South Pole, despite being 340 miles away in the completely wrong direction from the alleged geographic South Pole where Amundsen and Scott allegedly claim to be, Google Earth assures us the elevation above sea level there is 2,543 meters, or 8,343 feet. But Scott's own alleged journal, on the day they reached the alleged pole, claims it to be 9,500 feet in height, or 2,895.6 meters, 1,157 feet, or 352.6 meters higher, just taller than the height of the Wilshire Grand Center in Los Angeles. So none of the alleged scientists in the history of this alleged base since 1956 have noticed they are not only in the wrong location by 340 miles on the entirely wrong side of Fantasy Island, but also the wrong elevation by over the tallest skyscraper west of Chicago? And why is Google Earth putting the base at 2,543 meters, or 8,343 feet, and Wikipedia putting it at 9,301 feet, 1,000 feet taller? And why is this official but obviously bogus CGI topographic map of Fantasy Island showing the alleged South Pole there, where all of the longitude lines converge, in dark to near dark green color, which is only 800 to 1,000 meters above sea level on its legend? MASL means meters above sea level, or 2,625 feet to 3,280 feet elevation. Hell, let's just give them the tallest 3,280 feet. That's still 6,220 feet less than Scott's journal of 9,500 feet and 5,063 feet less than Google Earth claims. There's how high Google Earth says Amundsen-Scott South Pole base is, 2,543 meters. There's how tall Scott's own journal claims the alleged South Pole is, 2,896 meters. See the red. You see those red heights are reserved for the very tops of the tallest alleged mountains on Fantasy Island, which are nowhere near the alleged South Pole, there in dark green. Even when you triangulate where Google Earth claims the Amundsen-Scott South Pole base really is, 340 miles too far northeast of the pole, you can see it's all dark green there as well, and 3 times lower in elevation than Google Earth claims its height to be. That's the Gigalits in the Austrian Alps, only 100 meters taller than the alleged South Pole. Does that look like they're on that? Never mind 5 guys trying to pull this heavy-loaded sled up to such an elevation in thin air and biting cold. Just like all of the other numerous glaring contradictions around Fantasy Island, these 2 things have one thing in common. Despite similar shapes, they're both just fictional models. So why is the Amundsen-Scott base lying about being at the alleged geographical South Pole while 340 miles away in the wrong direction where Amundsen and Scott could have never possibly set foot, fancy sign or not? Easy. Because there is no South Pole, because we do not live on a globe. To come full circle, pun intended, in a weird kind of way, dateandtime.info accidentally spilled the beans by giving these coordinates for the alleged Amundsen-Scott South Pole station and alleged actual geographic South Pole. Because while on Fantasy Globe, those coordinates are only 920 feet away and close enough for horseshoes, where we may really live here, it's across the entire world from each other. The globe South Pole would have to be at 90 degrees south latitude and 0 degrees east or west longitude, where the 2 split at the Greenwich meridian. That's here. 90 degrees south latitude is the outer edge of the ice wall map, and that's 0 east or west longitude at the Greenwich meridian. But date and time's coordinates for the base are all the way over here. 89, 59, 51 south latitude is 920 feet short from the 90 degree outer line, and 139, 166, 22 east longitude is here. Now you realize why before the advent of the airplane and hydraulic crane, all of those early Antarctic expeditions looking to reach 90 degrees south latitude were sailing 40,000 to 60,000 combined miles around this ice circle over several combined expeditions at mostly the Red Ring latitude, looking for a place to get in and just thinking if we live on a globe, we must just be going around this theoretical perimeter and thinking this theoretical continent must be huge, having no modern propaganda reference back then, telling them it should only be 1.5 times bigger around than the United States, or 11,554 miles around, so they could say, hang on a second, something's wrong here. We've gone way too far. Finally, in 1841, Captain Ross found that place, now the Ross Ice Shelf, the only place around the entire red circle ring at roughly 67 south latitude you could get an ice-breaking ship anywhere inside that red coastal circle and anywhere near that blue 78 degrees south latitude ring by ship. And then nobody got past that afterwards because of the huge 1,000-foot thick, 200-foot high, insurmountable ice wall there at the blue circle. Yeah, that one. He tried there at that indent where no bases are to this day, but the ice wall stuck straight out of the water that entire stretch. Now you realize why after Captain Ross, the early 1900s South Polar expeditions were all taking these ridiculous and senseless 4-month detour sailing routes all the way around the world to New Zealand and then to the Ross Ice Shelf, when you'd obviously just do this and go straight south on a globe, cut around the coast to the Ross Ice Shelf in less than half the time. But which makes perfect logical sense here, east, the red route, as it's the quickest and only way you could sail to the Ross Ice Shelf from England, France, or Norway and still have known and owned territorial places to stop off and resupply on the way for such a long journey, or risk the much longer blue western route, all the way down the Atlantic Ocean, around South America, and then across the entire Pacific Ocean with nowhere to stop for supplies, as the Panama Canal shortcut through Central America wasn't finished until 1914, 2 years after Scott and Amundsen's alleged final South Polar expeditions. And on the red westward route, you're sailing with the southern roaring 40s westerly winds. And on the blue east route, you're sailing against those winds. Another slap in the face to the cake eaters who falsely claim this map is a globe projection, because from Norway, England, and France, the quickest and cheapest way to 90 degrees south latitude, 0 degrees east-west longitude, is clearly the green route around Africa, following the Greenwich Meridian line which leads right to it, not the red route around the world to New Zealand, and a longer hike to pop out 920 feet away through the polar Pac-Man teleport, but they couldn't, because they couldn't get their ships anywhere near there, and the ice barrier is blocking the way, even if they could. Even to this day, with aircraft and hydraulic cranes, none of these bases there are anywhere near the red 67.5 south latitude sea ice wall, and none of them are any further than the blue 75 south latitude ring. And in fact, with the exception of the alleged Amundsen-Scott South Pole base there, which we've shown to be lying and thus highly suspect and questionable already, not a single base is any further outside of that blue 80 degrees south latitude ring, where the alleged insurmountable ice wall is said to be. There are a few that are close, and what they're all really doing out there could be a whole other film series I don't have time to get into. And while more than a third of these countries' base locations make zero sense when they are on Fantasy Island on a globe, they all make perfect sense when you match them up to the Gleason map. The only one that left me scratching my head was this blue one from Italy to Mario Zucchelli base, the only Italian base, so it should be over there. But then I found out Mario Zucchelli's station is located in an extraterritorial area without any national sovereignty, so from a diplomatic point of view, it falls under the territorial jurisdiction of the Italian embassy in Wellington, New Zealand. And again, there are no bases in that entire stretch we already discussed that indents to the 80 degrees south latitude. Is it just the ice wall, or is there possibly something else stopping them? But first, let's debunk what it certainly isn't, like these flat earther videos going around TikTok claiming it is the dome up above at 13,000 feet coming down.
And this is from 1958, as you can see. Now, we're going to flip to the Antarctica and see what the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1958, before the Antarctic Treaty, says is there. Now, you won't find this in the new encyclopedias because the government's banned them.
False. It was here in the 1960 version as well, after the Antarctic Treaty of 1959.
But what I want you to notice right here is, notice how it says the flights proved inland areas to be featureless in character, with a dome 13,000 feet high at about latitude 80 degrees south, longitude 90 degrees east. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, let me show you with an image of what a flat earth map would look like. Now, this is what a latitude 80 degrees south would look like on a flat earth map. As you can see, the dome comes down closer to you over the wall, which would be about 13,000 feet. Now, if you go back out into the center of the earth, or the North Pole, and try to go up to the firmament with a little bit of calculation, it's going to show that it's about 385,500 feet away. It's really, really simple, folks. Now, if you're not familiar with any of this at all, and you're just now new to all this, you can say, well, this guy's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
In this case, unfortunately, he doesn't. Ice domes are well known in glacier morphology. It's the part of large ice sheets or ice caps that start to pile up in the accumulation zone. This is a picture of one of the many Antarctic domes. Wikipedia says on large enough ice sheets, they can get up to over 9,800 feet tall, which is what this encyclopedia is talking about. The pilots saw a massive glacial ice dome on the ground sticking up 13,000 feet high off the ground, not a dome coming out of the sky down to 13,000 feet altitude. What is interesting is where they saw it, right at about 80 degrees south latitude. You can just barely make one out here, just south of Union Glacier. What is interesting is this base here, Dome Fuji, one of the few bases just short of the alleged 80 degrees south latitude ice wall there in blue. Google Earth has blanked out everything around it. You can only zoom into a gray screen with Google name images all over it. But as you can see, it's at 77.5 degrees south latitude. And we read, Dome Fuji, or Valkyrie Dome, has an altitude of 3,810 meters above sea level. That's 12,500 feet high, and is the second highest summit or ice dome of the East Antarctic ice sheet, probably second to the 13,000-foot one on the encyclopedia that said the pilots saw at 90 degrees east longitude, and represents an ice divide, meaning two separate ice sheets meeting together. Is that what this ice wall is? Is that why they won't show anything under the image? And why would everything come together there around the entire ice ring at 80 degrees south, if so? Gleason had some theories on this, and this brings us back full circle, pun intended, to the sun and the lights, which started this entire film series in the first place, and is where it also shall end. It is no secret that I have a more metaphysical understanding of the Earth and luminaries from my esoteric and syncretism studies over the years than the cake eaters and flat earthers' physical theories and models. I will show some other ideas of both, and Gleason himself had a half metaphysical, half cake eater theory to appease the cake eaters. Disclaimer: I neither agree nor disagree with any of these theories, nor claim to know for certain what or where the luminaries really are or how they work, nor claim these people know for certain either. What or where they aren't or can't be is another story. On pages 318 and 319 in the Rosicrucian Philosophy in Questions and Answers book, the initiate asks, can you give an idea of the difference between heliocentric and geocentric astrology? Can material predictions in this life ever be made by the sun zodiac, or is that simply concerned with the spiritual side of a person's nature? Answer: one of the objections raised to the ancient system of astrology is that it regards the Earth as the center of the solar system, in the same manner as the ancients did, and that since Copernicus showed us that the planets move around the sun, a theory by the way, many people regard astrology as an exploded science, a palpably provable fallacy. And in order to overcome this objection, certain astrologers in modern times have invented what is called heliocentric astrology, which regards the sun as the center of our solar system and the planets moving around it. Even the Rosicrucians were left scratching their heads, as they say in the one breath, while it is perfectly true that scientifically speaking, meaning scientism or holding a theory as true that has never been proven, geocentric astrology is incorrect if we are in a heliocentric universe. In the next breath, they say they still just use the positions of the planets relative to the Earth, or geocentric, as the center, and note the various effects upon various people at the time when such planetary influences were felt, and so by experience we have come to our present system of judgment, which is therefore as true today as it ever was. The proof is in the pudding. The proof of astrology is in the truth of its predictions, and no one who has honestly studied this science and has tried to test it for himself can fail to find this truth. The geocentric system is correct and takes in all sides of man's nature, not only the material manifestation, but also the spiritual side. The heliocentric system, on the other hand, has been trumped up by people who aim to conform to science or scientism and have no concern with the spiritual side of nature. Therefore, it is the least satisfactory of the two. Besides, while those who have used the geocentric astrology for many centuries have recorded their observations of the effects of the planets from that standpoint, there is very little of such empirical knowledge from the standpoint of the heliocentric system, which we would advise the inquirer to leave alone. In plain English, even though scientism claims the realm is heliocentric, it doesn't work in reality, so we can't and don't use that useless rubbish. I received an email after parts 1 and 2 showing Lake Pukaki, Canterbury, New Zealand, at 4 a.m. on December 4th, showing how the sun was southeast before it visually rose in the east and then appeared to set southwest, like this, saying, all November rises south of east and sets south of west. When can I expect my apology? Never, I bet. Since you have proven yourself to be dumb as rocks, can you at least not say my name ever again, garbage human? A bit of the pot calling the kettle black from what I've heard, but that's none of my business. But you're right, I'm sorry. I apologize for falsely assuming you at least understood your own globe model enough where I didn't think I had to explain your fallacy to you like a child, so I will correct my mistake now. The heliocentric globe model says the sun is allegedly 109 times larger than the Earth, which looks great here, but allegedly 93 million miles away from Earth. Yet you won't find a single cartoon drawing on the internet that shows this in scale, because if the Earth has a diameter of 7,926 miles, then the Earth must be only 3 times that distance, or 23,778 miles away from the Sun, when there should be 11,733 and a half of those yellow circles between, if ever drawn in scale. Not 3 of them. This ancient form of black magic is called neurographics, programming the brain through art. Thou shalt not make graven images. They do the same when they draw these cartoons, explaining why you can only see the top of a boat from a lighthouse point A to a boat at point D from 20 miles away, due to the Earth's alleged curvature, and hope you're too stupid to notice they drew nearly 1/8 of the total alleged Earth curve in the 20 miles between the two objects, and drew the boat and lighthouse thousands of miles too tall to scale of the drawn curve between. We all see and experience the sun's rays as fanning out in a pyramid, crepuscular like this, from a local nearby light source. Never like this, from an alleged burning space fireball, allegedly 109 times bigger than the Earth and 11,733 Earth diameters farther away from it. But since you can't have your cake and eat it too, you have to accept the sun's rays must be directly spread straight and evenly over the Earth from that alleged size and distance, and not crepuscular, if you stick by your heliocentric globe model. Even though reality shows once again otherwise. It is well known and verifiable in all almanacs that the visible light in the sky we call the sun loops between the ecliptic belt between the outer yellow Tropic of Capricorn on the December 21st winter solstice into the red equator on March 21st, the spring equinox, then into the summer orange Tropic of Cancer on the June 21st summer solstice, and then back out to the red equator on the September 21st fall equinox, and back out again, looping like clockwork out and in every year. Let's simply verify this for this guy and the cake eaters in the comments section who don't seem to get this fact. From wherever you are standing, your zenith is leaning back, cricking your neck, and looking directly above you at 90 degrees to see a heavenly luminary like the sun. Your altitude is what degree or angle between your horizon, 0 degrees straight across, and your zenith straight above your head, you see the heavenly luminary like the sun. Your azimuth is just pointing your compass to the north, there, drawing 360 degrees in a circle around you and seeing how many degrees clockwise around that circle the heavenly luminary you are looking at is relative to north. So from where this guy is standing, he is seeing the sun at 45 degrees altitude, halfway between looking straight up in the sky at his zenith directly above his head and looking straight out at his horizon across the flat ground, and his compass says north is there. So the sun is where the red arrow ends, 135 degrees east of north, clockwise, around the 360 degree circle around him. That's his azimuth. Pretty simple. So if the light we call the sun crosses over the Tropic of Capricorn on the December 21st winter solstice, everyone living directly under it should have to lean back and crick their neck up to their 90 degree zenith to see the sun straight overhead at their solar noon. And the same with the people living on the Tropic of Cancer on their June 21st summer solstice, and the same with the people living on the equator twice a year, on both March 21st and September 21st equinoxes, as the sun passes over them between the tropics. So the Tropic of Capricorn is at 232609 south latitude, and here is Rubyvale, Australia, at 232509 south latitude, just about 30 odd miles only north of the Tropic of Capricorn. And sure enough, on their December 21st winter solstice, at their solar noon there, you can see that the sun is at 90 degrees zenith right above their head, as it should be. And the reason the sun is at 180 degrees south azimuth is because they are 30 odd miles north of the Tropic of Capricorn. So they have to turn around and face 180 degrees opposite their north compass bearing and then look up 90 degrees because the sun is actually 30 odd miles south of them as it travels overhead. Not any further south than that, as the cake eaters claim, or the altitude would be less than 90 degrees zenith if they had to look out at a farther away angle than straight over their heads. The inner or northern Tropic of Cancer is at 232609 north latitude. Here we have Ujjain, India, at 231855 north latitude, so about 7 or 8 miles south of the Tropic of Cancer, so pretty much dead smack underneath it and on it. And sure enough, here on the June 21st summer solstice in Ujjain, at their solar noon, the sun is at 90 degrees zenith just above their head, as it should be, and 0 degrees north for their azimuth, because they are just dead south of the Tropic of Cancer, so they have to look north 7 miles and then straight up over their head. And lastly, obviously the equator is 0 latitude, and here we have Mozambique, Africa, just 2 miles north of the equator, at 00149 north, and sure enough, on the March 21st equinox at solar noon, 90 degrees zenith above their head, 0 degrees azimuth, and remember, this has to match the September 21st equinox, and sure enough, 90 degrees zenith right above their head, 0 degrees north azimuth. I will even go back to Rubyvale, Australia before and after the December 21st winter solstice and show you. From December 1st through the 17th, you can see the altitude angle in the sky at solar noon keeps rising or getting higher in the sky, meaning the sun is coming from the north equator and getting closer and closer in south latitude to them each day, hence looking higher and higher in the sky to see it. Then boom, It sits there at 90 degrees zenith right above their heads from December 18th to the 25th, and then starts to go back down again in altitude, meaning back north towards the equator again, not more south. Again, Cake Eater himself rightly said in parts 1 and 2, what happens in latitude stays in latitude. Every single place on that latitude, all the way around the Earth, is the exact same daylight on that day. Meaning on each of these latitude lines on the days I just showed you, or any latitude lines in between them, on any day in between them, everyone living under that same latitude line or on it has to have the light in the sky called the sun go directly over their head at 90 degrees zenith on that day. If these guys have to look straight up to see the sun in November or early December, then so do these guys, and so do these guys. The same goes for anyone else on any same latitude line the sun is passing over on any given day. So here's what Cake Eater doesn't understand. At Lake Pukaki, New Zealand on December 4th, the sun's rising and setting angles are relative to the sun's position at Lake Pukaki's solar noon, where people there point a compass to due north, and they'll know it's solar noon when the sun is directly between them and the North Pole on their compass needle. Those angles are not relative to Lake Pukaki's geographical location on the ground itself. It does not mean the visual sun was straight overhead Lake Pukaki at 90 degrees zenith on December 4th and literally came from the southeast below New Zealand's latitude line and set southwest below New Zealand's latitude line, as this blatant neurographic falsely misleads the unthinking person by design. I'll prove it. On December 4th, the sun has not yet made its way down to the Tropic of Capricorn line 2 weeks later. It is still a little north of it, where the red zones are. Here is Swakopmund, Namibia, just slightly south of where the sun should be crossing over directly overhead on December 4th, at 2240-35 south latitude. And sure enough, on December 4th, the solar noon azimuth is 0 north, just north of them barely, and the altitude for solar noon is 89.6 zenith, just slightly north of above their heads. Later that same exact day, the sun passes just north of Rio de Janeiro at 2254-35 south latitude. As you can see, December 4th, solar noon 0 degrees north of it at 89.4 degrees north of them. Not quite zenith overhead. What happens in latitude stays in latitude. The sun cannot pass over Lake Pukaki way down here on December 4th, as this neurographic claims, and then magically teleport north and pass over Australia, Swakopmund, and Rio later that same exact day, while impossibly setting southwest of Lake Pukaki at the exact same time. And it doesn't. Had Cake Eater simply bothered to open the rest of the day between the red sunrise and sunset times and directions, he'd see on December 4th at Lake Pukaki's solar noon, the sun azimuth was north of Lake Pukaki, as it should be, and its altitude angle in the sky was way up north of Lake Pukaki and lower in the sky at only 68 degrees north, not 90 degrees azimuth straight above their head. Here, right where it should be and has to be, on its way across that latitude line with the others. But obviously what he's really confused about as a globie is this. How is the sun rising at azimuth 120 degrees east-southeast and setting azimuth 237 degrees west-southwest? One of many combined reasons for this is because those angles have nothing to do with Lake Pukaki's geographical location on the ground, because the visual sun is nowhere near Lake Pukaki at solar noon on December 4th, as I've shown. It's over 1,472 miles north of it, north of even the Tropic of Capricorn. They have partly to do with the rise and set angles relative to where the sun is at Pukaki's solar noon, which is way up here in latitude where it has to be, nowhere near Lake Pukaki on the ground. Make note, December 4th, 5:50 a.m. sunrise, 1:29 p.m. solar noon, 9:09 p.m. sunset. Well, there's Lake Pukaki, New Zealand. The sun is here at their 1:29 p.m. solar noon, and when the sun sets for them at 9:09 p.m. on December 4th, the sun is provably up here just north of the Tropic of Capricorn and just east of Madagascar, nowhere near west-southwest of Lake Pukaki, New Zealand. And then they have their night. And then when the sun is finally here, still north of the Tropic of Capricorn and just off the west coast of South America, is when it rises at 5:50 a.m. the next day for Lake Pukaki. Again, nowhere near east-southeast of New Zealand. Imagine the mental gymnastics it takes to claim that on the same day everyone on this orange line is provably seeing their solar noon sun at 90 degrees zenith right above their heads. The sun really actually rose southeast of Lake Pukaki, New Zealand, shot up to the Tropic of Capricorn to give everyone in Australia their zenith solar noon, shot way back down here to give New Zealand their south-southwest sunset, before slamming on the brakes, shooting way back up here so Africa can have its zenith solar noon, then shot way down south of Antarctica so that Rothera, 4 degrees longitude west of Vernadsky, could have its 2:10 a.m. sunrise in UTC +3 time zone first, loops backward so it can give Vernadsky in its UTC +3 time zone sunrise second, despite being 120 miles east of Rothera, then shoots all the way up here so Rio and everyone on that line in South America can have their 90 degrees zenith solar noons, slams on the brakes at New Zealand sunrise, then shoots way down south so it can rise southeast of Lake Pukaki, New Zealand the next day and do it again. Well, if the sun allegedly moves because the Earth spins towards it, to follow that absurd path every day, the Earth would have to constantly wobble violently south to north, north to south, stop spinning several times, go backward once a day, and we'd all be dead from non-stop cataclysmic tidal waves. Then they hit you with some really strange cake-eater logic and say it's the Earth's 23-degree tilt that is causing it. At least they acknowledge the sun moving between the tropical ecliptic belt, but while in the one breath, they allege the sun is 109 times larger than the Earth, 93 million miles away, and its rays are direct, in the other breath, those rays magically concentrate in a narrow belt in the middle and spread out over a wider area at the top and bottom. And so in September and March, when the Earth is on the side of the alleged orbit, that narrow belt shines right over the equator, and that's why those people see the sun 90 degrees zenith straight overhead, but not everyone else, though, from the same 93 million miles away, also with direct rays. But then in June, the tilt is facing the sun, and the narrow area hits above the equator at the northern Tropic of Cancer. And in December or January, when the Earth is on the other side of the alleged orbit, the tilt makes the narrow belt hit below the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn. But let's double check that. Remember, tilt the alleged globe any way you want, any degree you want. Latitude lines like the tropics and equator always run exactly east to west, not northeast to southwest, etc., because they claim to draw them in alignment to the alleged spin direction, not the alleged tilt direction. An equator means exactly halfway between the farthest north and farthest south on both models. Well, Let's start with Lake Pukaki, New Zealand, December 4th, with this alleged narrow direct sunbelt rising in the southeast of New Zealand in the morning and setting in the west-southwest after sunset. The yellow tilted vertical line along the alleged Earth tilt is due geographic north-south longitude. The orange is the Tropic of Cancer, red in the middle of the equator, and at the bottom green the Tropic of Capricorn, and we know the sun is right there, just north of Capricorn and just west of South America on December 4th at New Zealand's 5:50 a.m. sunrise. So New Zealand better damn well come around this turn north of that for that to be rising southeast of Lake Pukaki, at least here or higher, and then it better damn well make its way down this yellow crooked line to have that sun 1,472 miles north of it at Lake Pukaki's 1:19 p.m. solar noon, or the globe has a big problem. Let's mark it and see. Houston, the globe has a big problem. That's New Zealand right there in the yellow circle southeast of Australia over SCAMTARCTICA. Let's back it up. New Zealand had to rotate in at least our red marker arrow or higher north to make the sun southeast of it at its sunrise, but it came in way too far south of where it had to. And obviously this doesn't work on the globe model. And we have a bigger problem as it rotates around to its 9:09 p.m. sunset time when the sun is just east of Madagascar there, way west northwest of New Zealand, not setting west southwest. But the final globe death blow comes next. Because even the globe acknowledges that the sun is even more north, all the way up on the equator, for both the September 21st and March 21st equinoxes, which Cake Eater didn't bother to check, but I did. As I showed you already with Nzamalihe, Africa, literally just under 7 miles north of the equator, having a 90-degree zenith solar noon straight up over their heads on both September 21st here and March 21st here, proving the visual light we call the sun is indeed traveling across the equator latitude line both equinox days. Lake Pukaki on those 2 days delivers the absolute death blow to the globe. Here you can see Lake Pukaki, New Zealand on the September 21st equinox at their solar noon sees the sun at only 45 degrees north altitude, halfway between their north horizon on the ground and their zenith straight up ahead, hence so visually low in the sky, confirming it is indeed way up north of them over the equator. But if you notice here on September 21st, before actual visual sunrise in the north, the sun still approaches them from south-southeast and east to southeast, and then leaves after visual sunset at west-southwest and south-southwest. And here again on the March 21st equinox, the exact same. Solar noon is still at 45 degrees altitude, 0 degrees north azimuth, way up north on the equator, but still approaches before sunrise from south-southeast and east-southeast, and it leaves after sunset at west-southwest and south-southwest. Let's note again, March 21st sunrise time 7:42 a.m. Solar noon 6 hours later at 1:46 in the afternoon. Sunset 7:49 p.m. So now you're supposed to swallow the globe whopper that though the sun is provably all the way up here on the equator, both September 21st and March 21st, at a much later 7:42 a.m. sunrise, because the sun is much farther north, somehow this sun is also still approaching New Zealand from south-southeast of it, but still somehow ends up 45 degrees angular north of it at Lake Pukaki's solar noon on March 21st? That means now New Zealand better rotate around this ball at least this high or higher at its 7:42 a.m. sunrise to have that equatorial sun south-southeast of it, and better hurry its ass all the way down this yellow arrow and only 6 hours later to have its solar noon 46 degrees altitude north of there. I'll put the spot marker up. Sorry, New Zealand is clearly way too far southwest of the equatorial sun for that sun to be approaching it from the southeast on the failed globe model. The sun would clearly be northeast on a globe. Tilt or no tilt, latitude lines run due east-west parallel to each other and perpendicular and relative to geographical north. And obviously to claim later that same night with the sun now provably up over the equator at Lake Pukaki's 7:49 p.m. sunset, that sun is somehow magically south-southwest of New Zealand is so ludicrous it beggars belief. It would clearly be setting northwest of New Zealand if we lived on a globe. But those southern sunrise and sunset angles to solar noon are very real and very provable, despite being impossible on a globe. So we cannot live on a globe, and Fantasy Island, therefore, cannot exist. Of course, there will be panic-stricken cake eaters who claim the Earth tilt should not be this way, but rather this way, falsely thinking this solves their impossibility dilemma. That would mean the sun on the June 21st summer solstice would have to be 90 degrees azimuth straight overhead the people living on the southern Tropic of Capricorn in southern South America and northern Australia. And we know for a fact their southern summer is in December and January, not June and July. And Florida and the people living on the northern Tropic of Cancer would have to be having their summer in December and January instead of June and July, which is provably the opposite in reality. Sorry, cake eaters, your globe does not work. This does, however, work on both the physical flat Earth model and the metaphysical etheric Earth toroidal model. On the flat Earth, east and west are not straight lines like on a globe. They curve in a circle around the plane from either direction of where the observer is. So relative to the solar noon sun position for Lake Pukaki, New Zealand there, the sun is doing this, curving around the same east-west latitude line from Lake Pukaki's solar noon to their sunset, whereas on a globe's east to west coordinates, it would look like this. But on the flat Earth, north just means closer to the North Pole in a latitude ring than from where it started or where you are observing from. So you may falsely say, well, if Lake Pukaki is here and the North Pole is that way, and their sunset is also kind of that same way, isn't that northwest of them? No, because north means a latitude circle inside of that yellow circle closer to the North Pole, which the sun never does. The sunset point is still on the same exact yellow west latitude circle as where it was at their solar noon, even though it looks northwest to us looking down relative to facing the North Pole from there. So that green line between Lake Pukaki's solar noon and sunset represents true northwest, because anywhere on that yellow line between is still just plain old west. And what is the opposite of north? Obviously south. So if that green line is northwest of Lake Pukaki's solar noon, it is clear that position 0 is right on the green northwest line, and position 1, the purple arrow, is farther away from the green northwest line from solar noon position 0, and then position 4, the light blue line, is even farther away from the north green line than both of those. And since the yellow line is due west and the green line is north and the opposite of north is south, anyone can see that even though the sun is traveling due west around that yellow circle, position 4 has to be southwest of positions 0 and 1, relative to position 0 or solar noon, because it is the farthest away opposite of the north green line. That's position 4 northwest, that's southwest, away from north. That's how the sun moves from 0 north solar noon to west-southwest of New Zealand's sunset, while still giving everyone in Madagascar and South Africa on a latitude ring inside of New Zealand or north of New Zealand a 90-degree zenith solar noon straight overhead later that same exact day. And that is how that same sun can come around north of New Zealand on the inside yellow northern latitude ring over Rio de Janeiro in South America at 90 degrees zenith solar noon straight over their Latin heads while New Zealand is having their nighttime. But then when it gets to here, New Zealand's next day's sunrise, be coming at New Zealand from the east-southeast. Because relative to their solar noon, that green line is northeast of them, and that yellow line the sun is traveling around is clearly coming at their solar noon intersect from further away from that green line, or southeast of it, between hours 3 and 4, and sure as shit curves back towards the green line to end up north of them at their next day's solar noon, just like this. You? Not so much. Of course, I already explained this in the beginning of part 1 for those with eyes to see and brains that still function, but because New Zealand there in red is south or on an outside latitude ring farther out from the north than the ecliptic belt that the sun never leaves in yellow, no matter what day of the year, their solar noon will always be due north of them on a compass, whether the sun is here December 21st or way up here June 21st. The closest the sun will ever be to them on any given day in that yellow belt is here, due north. It will never go behind them, where they have to turn around behind them to what we are falsely programmed to think of as south on a compass to see their solar noon. The rising sun is not coming from a northern latitude ring inside that red circle closer to the North Pole than at New Zealand's solar noon, and it is not setting in a latitude ring in that red circle closer to the North Pole than New Zealand's solar noon. So it can't get any more norther from New Zealand than its closest solar noon point there. So angularly speaking, it is coming from the opposite southeast of due north solar noon, peaking in due north at solar noon, and setting in the opposite farthest southwest of closest north solar noon. Our globe indoctrination makes us think of south as just one direction. On the globe, if 360 people at the North Pole all head due south 1 degree longitude apart from each other, they all end up at the exact same place, there. There is only one south on the globe. On the flat Earth, they all end up scattered around the ice ring with no Uber lift home, because there are infinite souths fanning out in a circle from the one North Pole. Gleason felt there was even more to the story, and again, I'm not claiming or agreeing this is how it is or how it works, only showing you how it could work where it can't work on a globe. The globies themselves say it is computed that the sun's rays lose nearly 1/4 their brilliancy by passing through the Earth's atmosphere, and if that atmosphere, alleged to be 45 miles, extended 15 times as far from the surface as it does, or 675 miles, we should receive no light at all from the sun, but should be plunged into perpetual night or darkness. Remember that. Light penetrates the rare body, like hot or dry air, further than the denser, like cold or moist air. It also passes through the more transparent more readily than through the less transparent. Anyone outside on a cloudy day or foggy morning versus a sunny, cloudless day can attest to this. Heat expands or rarefies air, and cold condenses it. The southern atmosphere is more transparent or rarefied than the northern atmosphere, meaning light penetrates farther through the air in the south. Thus, the tropical or equatorial air is expanded more and rare than the cold Arctic and also the cold Antarctic. So Gleason surmised when the sun is here on the red equator ring on both the March 21st and September 21st spring and fall equinoxes, even though the sun's light should shine in a full round circle around it, because the atmosphere in the Arctic inner circle and Antarctic outer ice wall circle are so cold they are condensed and the sun's light cannot penetrate their air, while the much hotter and rarefied air between the warm tropics and a little further each way outside allows the light to penetrate further, hence making this bean shape in yellow instead of a perfect circle. Its light is able to expand through the rarefied air east and west around the circle in the bean shape, but not the cold and condensed air north or inside circle or south, the ice ring circle. And since the outer or southern air is more rarefied than the northern, the most light would penetrate farthest from the source sun in the southern latitude rings, the long green arrow, which could also explain why Lake Pukaki, New Zealand, there, who is still having hot 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 Celsius days in March and September, like Denmark's hottest summer days in June in the condensed northern hemisphere air, despite the sun provably being way far north of them on the red equator ring, could have the light preceding the actual sun appearing to come in from the southeast and leave in the southwest, because the sun's preceding and trailing light is penetrating farther in the southern rarefied air. The sun's light is almost as far south as the ice wall there, and that same ice wall is clearly south of New Zealand there. So is that preceding light not approaching New Zealand from the southeast? And that light hasn't even fully penetrated the ice shelf yet. Whereas this same effect would be even more pronounced on the December 21st winter solstice, which is actually hot summer for New Zealand, when the sun is still north of New Zealand, but even more south of the equator on the Tropic of Capricorn ring, meaning even more hot air and rarefied air for the south, and allowing even more southern light to get through on its way to and from New Zealand at sunrise and sunset, this time penetrating even into the ice shelf itself, not just outside of it like the equinoxes. Now imagine the mental globe gymnastics it takes to look at Ujjain, India there, on the northern inner Tropic of Cancer, just south below the sharp peninsula of Dubai there, in June, on the June 21st summer solstice, having their solar noon 90 degrees zenith straight above their head, proving the sun is indeed traveling east-west across the Tropic of Cancer. And there's Lake Pukaki, New Zealand, way down south of the Tropic of Cancer and way southeast of Ujjain, India there on a globe. So after Pukaki's sunset, the sun is provably still moving northwest away from Lake Pukaki. Southwest of them on a globe would be the sun putting on the brakes and shooting straight down there past Fantasy Island. Yet here's Lake Pukaki, New Zealand on the same day in June, the 21st, the northern summer solstice, doing exactly that, having their receding sunlight after sunset moving west-southwest of them to south-southwest of them. This is obviously more than ludicrously impossible on a globe, without the globe suddenly spinning south to north 90 degrees to make the visual sun shoot north to south 90 degrees and killing everyone instantly with cataclysmic tidal waves and earthquakes every day this provably happens. But again, it works fine theoretically on the physical flat Earth Gleason model, with the sun's preceding and following light still reaching, approaching, and leaving New Zealand from farther south outside latitude circles than the actual visible sun itself, provably north of New Zealand. I think Gleason felt the cake eaters of his day were confusing the source of light, the sun, or like this flashlight, with the actual light projection coming from it. In this analogy, this flashlight never leaves the center of the room, but since its light beam is crepuscular, it would be approaching and leaving certain objects slightly from their south as it turns, like this. But they say it must be the guy holding the flashlight walking out towards them on an angle. Well, couldn't that also happen on a globe? Not when they contradictorily claim their alleged poles from 80 to 90 degrees north and south latitude still receive oblique 40% incidental sunlight radiation of equatorial regions, accounting for an alleged 24-hour south polar sun despite the cold and actually causing the cold, not deflecting around the cold towards the center of their alleged globe. Sorry, that's called having your cake and eating it too. Gleason's book is riddled with chapters, Bible passages, Antarctic voyages, etc., and even this on his own map under the December 21st solstice. On December 21st, the sun moves round the Tropic of Capricorn and during the day lights up the southern portion of the Earth from the Antarctic Circle to some portion of the Antarctic ice, as he illustrates here. But then he says, there is no sunlight beyond 80 degrees south latitude, but unknown regions of ice. Coincidentally, that just happens to be exactly that blue latitude ring where I showed you there are no bases further outside of, other than the highly dubious alleged Amundsen-Scott South Pole base, and the same exact latitude where all of the early explorers said there was an impenetrable ice barrier, and the same latitude the globe calls the southern pole of inaccessibility, and the same latitude where Dome Fuji Base is parked 150 miles north of on one of these dome walls, but either won't or can't go any further for some reason, and Google satellites magically won't let us see what is beyond that to the alleged South Pole, apparently thinking grayed out boxes with their logo is somehow more important than taking pictures of the alleged mysterious South Pole. And the same latitude where the ice wall indents in from the ocean and there are no Antarctic bases, nor have there ever been. In the same time zone, Fantasy Island draws bulging out into the ocean as where they are hiding 3 hours of time in the north, and we're to believe this is all just one big coincidence? No light at all is a far cry from this alleged 24-hour globe sun that nobody can even agree on when it happens within days or weeks of each other. The New York Post recently ran an article about living in Antarctica. Their expert, Byron Adams, a Brigham Young professor of biology who has spent several stretches at McMurdo Base, usually staying for 2 or 3 months, assures us that the sun at McMurdo fully rises once in October and sets in March? How many times has this guy been there? March? There's McMurdo. Allegedly, the 24-hour sun ends February 20th or February 19th, nearly 2 weeks before March. The only base that allegedly gets a March sunset is the dubious Amundsen-Scott South Pole base, allegedly 860 miles south of McMurdo. Why can't these people ever get their stories straight? Now, there is another glaring problem we need to address based on what these sunglass-wearing guys experienced at what they at least believed to be Union Glacier Station. I've already explained in part 1 why I think there could very possibly be a 24-hour sun in a certain Goldilocks sweet spot right around the ice shelf, that can be experienced in certain places in that zone, but not outside of it, in line with Gleason's proposal that there is total darkness outside of 80 south latitude, and not north of it, which is where we find the bases on the Antarctic Peninsula that admit no 24-hour sun for bases there. And again, like Gleason, that explanation does not allow for a 24-hour sun past 80 degrees south latitude any more than a satellite dish allows for the receiver to pick up a bouncing signal any closer than a specific spot. I will say that Gleason's theory about the hypercold condensed air stopping light from going any further, even refracting it east or west like the jelly bean, mixed with the modern understanding that light slows down, passing through glass or water and speeds up after, could maybe even make something like a condensed air atmospheric movie screen at 80 south latitude there in the blue line that contributes to this phenomenon. Union Glacier is allegedly only 20 miles north of there at 79 degrees 45 minutes south latitude. So for those in the Dave Weiss Marty Leeds camp that the 24-hour sun was fake plasma tech projected there, the perfect sky to do it on is only 20 miles away, according to Gleason's theory.
The Antarctic can also be unbelievably beautiful, with refracted light causing false suns and moons.
And it's incredibly bright there. I mean, you have to wear sunglasses. I don't like sunglasses. I don't like the average sunglasses. You have to wear them.
It's like impossible to step outside without them.
Yeah, bro. You like 10
Just
seconds.
white everywhere.
Yeah,
right?
10 seconds. You feel like you can't see. And they're like, your eyeballs will get sunburned. You need to wear them. And I'm like, nah. Yeah, I'm not wearing sunscreen. I'm not wearing sunglasses. I was there for 5 minutes, and I'm like, all right, you got me. I mean, it's crazy bright there, bro. Every angle. But yeah.
There is not one sunglass-wearing picture from any of Scott's, Amundsen's, or Shackleton's teams, nor mention in their journals of a 24-hour sun, nor getting sunburned eyeballs or vision problems, and they were all allegedly there in the exact same times and months, including December, when the final experiment was in Union Glacier. In fact, Scott's journal on December 31st says at 10 p.m. there was just enough light to write or work with. On January 25th, the sun showed during breakfast, and there was just enough light to see their old track. The whole journal is riddled with talk of tonight and the next day, and how temperatures drop to extreme cold in the nights. In a 24-hour sun full of eyeball-burning light? If they get so sweaty marching, why not march in the colder night and camp and relax and dry off in the daytime and late evening sun if you have a 24-hour sun? It just doesn't add up. As for the coastal bases in Part 2 alleging 24-hour suns, which I have mapped out on the bottom in red dots, I have already proven during November and December to December 21st, the sun is passing over that orange zone north of the Tropic of Capricorn until it reaches Capricorn December 21st on the solstice and goes no further south. I have also proven the sun is over the equator on the September 21st equinox, so that is 91 days between to make the 1,032.7 miles of the 23.4 degrees between the equator and the tropics, meaning the sun is moving 11.35 miles closer per day to both Capricorn and those bases. Aside from Rothera, there on an inlet bay, they are all coastal bases on near sea level. You can see here again for yourself, meaning there are no mountains or elevation between them and the sun north of Capricorn, just level ocean. Even with Rothera and Vernadsky bases here on the globe model, alleging to have land between them and the sun as it passes over in late November way up north of the Tropic of Capricorn at 44 degrees altitude in their solar noon sky, the only mountains between them in that yellow range vary from only 240 meters at the lowest height to only 2,261 meters at the tallest, there, or only 1.4 miles high, 116 miles north of Rothera, which cannot possibly be blocking their daily sunlight, especially when more than 1/3 of that mountain would be buried under 0.42 miles of alleged Earth curve chord arc. Sorry, cake eaters. And since I've already proven Fantasy Island cannot exist, these bases would really be orientated like this, as on the Gleason map, with the mountains now behind them and not even between them and the sun, passing north of the Tropic of Capricorn. Just like those other 4 bases there. The problem for both the globe and the flat Earth model incorporating that sun traveling north of Capricorn as an actual physical thing and not an apparent metaphysical relative frequency phenomenon as covered in part 1 is that sun is heading 11.35 miles south per day in that orange band, but Rothera and Mawson are only 56.63 miles further south in latitude than Casey, that blue line, and these are not actual base locations, just a visual to show you what minuscule latitude differences between them we are discussing. So on the globe model, if that sun is lighting up a 24-hour day in June on the north top of the globe due to both Earth tilt and position in the alleged annual elliptical orbit, then as the maximum light exposure slowly moves south through the year to light up the south bottom in December as the Earth swings around the orbit, Casey should get its alleged 24-hour sun first, since it is 56.63 miles further north of Rothera and Mawson, and the sun is moving from the north to the south from June to December. But Rothera and Mawson are allegedly getting theirs 10 to 13 days before Casey. Not only that, but with the sun moving 11.35 miles south per day, that should only take 4.98, or say 5 days difference, not 10 to 13 days. Again, I'm aware these latitudes are correct, but these bases are nowhere near each other in east-west longitude. But Rothera and Mawson should lose their alleged 24-hour sun in January before Casey to its north, as the sun would still be shining on Casey but not them, as the sun travels back north from the changing orbital and tilt angles to light up only the top of the globe again in June. Not get 9 to 11 more days of 24-hour sun than Casey. And again, with the sun now moving 11.35 miles per day north back towards the equator, that should be only a 5-day difference, not 9 to 11 days. Myrni is even worse, as it's only 44.13 miles north latitude of Rothera and Mawson in the purple line, so with the 11.35 miles per day southward moving sun, it too should get a 24-hour sun first in November, 3.88 days before Mawson and Rothera, not 6 to 8 days after them on December 5th, and the same in January. Myrni should still have a 24-hour sun for 3.88 days more than Rothera and Mawson, not ending 6 or 7 days before them on January 7th. And no, cake eaters, the sun cannot strike Rothera and Mawson 44 to 57 miles south of Myrni or Casey, but not them, for 7 to 11 days in January, while people living 2,177 miles north of them, above the Tropic of Capricorn, are experiencing the source ball of light at 90 degrees zenith straight over their heads, moving 11.35 miles north every day. You can't just pretend the sun is down here to fit your model when it's provably not. And again, I shouldn't have to point out the absurdity of two coastal bases like Rothera and Mawson on identical 67.33 south latitude having 2 days difference in alleged 24-hour sun start and stop periods, or 41 to 50 minute day length differences, with no mountains but only flat ocean between them and the sun, traveling north of the Tropic of Capricorn at 44 degrees altitude, halfway up the sky from their horizon to their zenith. That said, it is interesting that in November in Rothera, on the 29th, its preceding sunlight angle is indeed coming from the south, despite the actual sun being way up north, just north of Capricorn, at 44 degrees angle at Rothera's solar noon. Gleason would say that's because Rothera is only at 67.33 south latitude on this ice ledge, sticking out into the Atlantic Ocean, while the preceding Capricorn sun's light is penetrating almost into 80 degrees south latitude. So not the sun itself, but its approaching light, there, is still behind Rothera, or south of it, or away from north, even though the following sun behind that light is north, or in front of Rothera, on the Tropic of Capricorn. But again, just like the heliocentric globe model assumes the sun is an actual thing, a burning ball of hydrogen and helium 93 million miles away, neurographics not to scale, many, but certainly not all of the flat Earth models also blindly assume the sun is an actual thing, like you could fly up there and touch it like your kitchen counter if it didn't burn you up. Only Gleason said both that thing and Polaris were 1,725 nautical miles or 1,985 miles away from our ground. And I've heard flat Earth models ranging from much closer, absurdly mistaking obvious converging and counter-diverging visual perspective for actual cloud level, to up to 3,000 miles away, which can't verify for certain a source versus a converging then diverging focal point. But what if it's not a physical thing at all, but metaphysical, like a rainbow you can see but can't land your plane on and will move away as you try to get closer? Or like the wind you can feel on your face, see it blowing the trees, and even harness its energy, but you can't catch the wind and put it in a bottle.
The southern hemisphere has its own rotation, and the north has its own rotation. But the northern hemisphere rotation is mirroring its rotation out to the south, everywhere around the south. This is why in star trail photography, someone can stand on a meridian, because every man is on a meridian line north to south. He can stand anywhere on here and film a rotation, a star rotation. Well, he's only getting a rotation because there's a permanent vortex which rotates the whole system right hidden in the center Arctic. Its vortex is always turning 15 degrees per hour. So you can film out here, you're getting a mirrored image. All the ancients have mentioned mirrors hundreds of thousands of times. You're getting a mirrored rotation, a circular motion of stars. Okay? But that's on a fixed tripod for star trailing. But if you had if you're tracking a star, you'll find the star's moving because the whole clock's moving. This is turning. So it's turning the star. The whole star's moving right around the Earth in the southern hemisphere. So one rotation in here is one rotation all the way around here. But if you're just fixed in your little time zone, let's say you're really ignorant and don't know there's another part of the world existing, you're just going to see your star rotation here and you think, well, that's it. 15 degrees per hour is mirroring this 15 degrees per hour here. But if you're a thinker and you've got a mind, a full one, activated, you'll find that this star here is moving this way 15 degrees. At the same time, you're getting a star trail moving in the circle here 15 degrees per hour. Okay? And this, you've got the northern hemisphere, you've got them going like this, okay? This is slowly winding in right up to this point here. Okay? Where they become balanced. And you've got all the extra stars in here forming the new constellations. As it's moving up like this, they're overlaying these stars here. There's always this overlay, and that's how we get the new constellations. They're moving in and out from here, from the south to the north. The northern stars are always there. The southern stars are actually the same stars as the northern stars, but they're inside out. They're inverted, seen backwards, and as they move out, they expand bigger and bigger. Like this. This is what's happening. I've drawn it down here. There's the real sun's back here. And he doesn't go far. He doesn't go anywhere. He's stuck in there, maimed. He just does circles. And then, then they talk about the sun we see out here between the fields, because that's where the electrical charge is created. Between here and here, bingo. And the changing magnetic field moves the sun around the earth, right? Moving magnetic field moves the electrical current. The moving electrical current changes the magnetic field. Because as the sun's moving, the field changes. Boom. Lift this one. Sun moves here. Oh, boom. Oh, bang. Sun's there. Now, oh, bang. It's changing there. Bang, 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 bang. Infinitely to create the sun, the spark, the charge. I can see everything. Everything moves around from the south, east, north, and back around this way. Okay, everything moves like that on my meridian. The whole cycle. Everybody, no matter where they are around the earth, is on a meridian, and they will see that mirrored projection from the north, that cardinoid shape. Well, they don't see it actually, but they. Certain times of the year, you know everything's coming more south, and you know it's just the way it works. It all makes sense. It goes like this and does a loop here, and then comes back out again. You never see the loop because the loop represents the sunny side, where the stars have spun into around the sun, close to the sun. It's all balanced within this vortex, you see. So it spins around into the centre here, but it's just one S cycle, like this. Okay, so it comes out and goes back in, and this is the daylight hours, where it's close to the centre of the sun, because the sun is in the centre, like I mentioned earlier. It's at the centre there. Our sun's out here. We see out here in the tropical gap, because that's the end of the Milky Way. That's the image that comes from reality. So understanding this complete separation here in the field comes about on the 17th of October. Okay, as it's receding, bang, 17th of October, the sun pops into the far south. This is the down and out in the field I was talking about earlier, where the sun is permanently around here, because all these are the pomegranates mentioned in the Bible. These represent the suns, but they're everywhere. They're infinite. It's all down and out. Okay? Then it gets drawn back in again. It follows this system. And all the system is created by the 2D plane up here. This is the flexing down and out of the ecliptic plane. Contraction, expansion. Contraction, expansion. See, it's lateral this way. It's sort of vertical in our realm, if you imagine it this way. You understand all this? All these curving magnetic field lines is part of a toroidal field. The field curves. If you're following a compass, you're traveling a curving field like this. This is why they invented the gyro laser. It takes you for a direct route, straight. Okay? The compass bearing is always curved like this. But between the tropics, it is dead straight. North to south. It's the only one place on earth where declination is dead straight. There's no declination. It's dead south because you're on a meridian. Look, there's your south, there's your north. Or you're here, there's your south, there's your north. We've recently had these characters, Will Duffy and his comrades, liars, have travelled out here and said, oh, here's the South Pole. or some South Pole stations out there. But no, you can leave anywhere, head south on your meridian, wherever you are on Earth. Let's say you live there or you live there. You just go travel south, there's your south. You travel south, there's the South Pole. There's the South Pole. South Pole, South Pole. It's south all the way around here. There is no one South Pole. It's a returning north, a mirrored projection of the north.
Could that explain approaching sunlight from the south and even a 24-hour sun in parts of Antarctica? Is there really a 24-hour sun anywhere in Antarctica, or was it friggin' laser beams? I don't claim to know what the luminaries are, or all the workings of their wonders, mystery, and glory, but the ground under my feet and every engineering project in history built on it tells me it can't work like this. So that's the end of that.